You've been lied to about peace. They told you it comes from fixing everything, from being perfect, from doing more, being more. But if that were true, why do you still feel not enough? Why does your mind spin at night like a wheel that won't stop? Why do you lie in bed tired but wired trapped in loops of should've and what if? The truth is, peace doesn't come from controlling life. It comes from letting go, and no wisdom explains that better than Buddhism. For over 500 years, monks, sages, and seekers have found freedom not by fixing their lives, but by changing how they see them. They discovered that the thoughts we cling to, the ones that say, "I messed up, I'm broken, I have to fix this," are like clouds, real for a moment, but never who we are. Tonight, as you listen to these teachings, something inside you will begin to shift. The pressure to be perfect will soften, the noise in your head will slow, and you'll feel, maybe for the first time in a long time, that it's okay to rest, even with loose ends, even with flaws, even without having it all figured out. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is Buddhist truth wrapped in warmth, spoken to your soul, so that by the time your eyes close, your heart opens. And when you wake up, you won't just feel rested, you'll feel free. Are you ready? Let's begin. You've been holding your breath, holding yourself to standards that no one told you were allowed to break. You've measured your worth by your success, your peace by your progress, and your rest by how well you did today. But what if everything you've been calling failure wasn't wrong, but sacred? What if every mistake you've tried to bury was actually a doorway to something deeper, something the world can't measure, but your soul quietly longs for? Let's go there now. Failure doesn't mean the end in Buddhism, it means the beginning of something honest. In the Bodhisattva path, a life committed to awakening not only for yourself but for all beings, failure isn't weakness. It's wisdom taking shape. You fall not because you are lost, but because you are learning how to walk with your eyes open. One of the most misunderstood things about Buddhism is the assumption that spiritual awakening means being flawless, calm at all times, always saying the right thing, always doing the right thing. But the Bodhisattva, one who vows to stay behind until all beings are free, not perfect. That's not the point. The Bodhisattva is compassionate. The Bodhisattva makes mistakes, but doesn't turn away from them. The Bodhisattva uses them. In Buddhist stories, even the greatest practitioners were not immune to failure. There's the tale of the monk who meditated in solitude for years and believed he had conquered anger. But when another monk accidentally kicked over his bowl, his rage erupted like a storm. He was humiliated. Not because he had failed to be peaceful, but because he had believed peace meant not feeling anything. That moment became his turning point. He realized peace wasn't about suppression, but honest awareness. His so-called failure showed him the path he couldn't see before. In Buddhism, this is not just acceptable, it is sacred. The Sanskrit term dukkha, often translated as suffering, also means unsatisfactoriness. And that includes the dissatisfaction you feel when you fall short. But here's the gift. Dukkha is the first noble truth. It's not hidden. It's the starting line. Buddhism doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with the honest confession that life is messy, that we struggle, and that this struggle is not a problem to fix, but a truth to understand. So why do we hate failure so much? Because we believe it separates us from others. That if we get it wrong, we'll be judged, left behind, unloved. But that fear is built on illusion. Buddhism teaches anatta, no fixed self. You are not your resume, your achievements, or your past errors. You are unfolding moment by moment. What failed yesterday does not define the truth of who you are today. What matters is how you meet it now. Think about how compassion is born, not from getting everything right, but from seeing how easy it is to get it wrong. When you've been broken, you see others' pain more clearly. That's not failure, that's insight. When a bodhisattva stumbles, they don't pretend they didn't fall. They turn the fall into a gesture of care. "I know what that feels like," they whisper. "Let me walk beside you." This is not just a poetic idea. Neuroscience confirms that failure, when held with awareness, strengthens the brain. When we make a mistake and notice it, new pathways form. It's called neuroplasticity. Awareness isn't just calming, it's rewiring. So when the Buddha said, "Mindfulness is the path to the deathless," he wasn't being metaphorical. Mindfulness turns mistakes into transformation. The only thing that makes a mistake permanent is hiding it. But still, we live in a culture that punishes imperfection. We feel pressure to succeed quickly, to make progress visibly. That's why the Bodhisattva path is so radical. It's a vow to show up, even when you don't look ready. It's not about arriving at enlightenment, it's about walking toward it with your flaws in full view, not out of shame, but out of love for the path itself. You see, in Buddhism, failure isn't an obstacle to growth. It is growth in disguise. The ancient texts speak of the paramitas, the perfections or virtues a bodhisattva cultivates. But the word paramita doesn't mean perfection in the Western sense. It means crossing over. Like a boat crossing a river, you don't perfect generosity by never being selfish. You perfect it by noticing when you are selfish and choosing again. That's how you cross the river. One honest act at a time. Let's talk about effort. Right effort, in the Noble Eightfold Path, is not about trying harder, it's about understanding how you try. Often when we fail, we push ourselves harder with blame. "You should have known better," we say. But the Buddha never taught transformation through shame. He taught it through awareness. When a meditator drifts into distraction, the practice isn't ruined. The practice is to notice the drift and return. That return is the path. If you didn't drift, you'd have nothing to return from. Failure, then, becomes the bell of mindfulness. Each misstep saying, "Wake up, try again." There's a story of a student who kept falling asleep in meditation. He told the Buddha, ashamed. The Buddha didn't scold him. He offered 3 gentle questions. Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping at night? Are you being kind to yourself? That's the tone of Buddhist practice, say no judgment, but care. Failure isn't punished, it's held. And when we speak of awakening, we're not talking about becoming a perfect version of yourself. We're talking about seeing things clearly, even your failures, especially your failures. When you see clearly, you stop trying to hide, you stop wearing masks, you stop needing to appear spiritual, you become real. Real is the only place awakening lives. This is why Buddhism places such deep importance on humility, not as self-deprecation, but as truthfulness. When you stop pretending to be more enlightened than you are, you make room for learning. And not just for yourself, for others too. Your humility makes you trustworthy. It tells others they can bring their whole selves forward, not just the polished parts. Failure also teaches patience, real patience. Not the kind where you tap your foot waiting for things to improve, but the kind where you settle in, stay present, and trust the process even when it's slow. In the Bodhisattva path, there's no rush. You take vows that may take lifetimes to fulfill, and still you walk. One act of love, one breath, one return. There's power in that kind of commitment, a power that doesn't need to prove itself, a power that isn't afraid of falling down because it knows it will rise again. The Bodhisattva path is not a ladder you climb. It's a circle you keep widening every mistake, every moment of doubt, becoming part of the offering. And maybe the most beautiful part, failure connects you to others. When you stop pretending to have it all together, you become a bridge. Others look at you and think, if they can keep going with all that, maybe I can too. That's how compassion spreads, not from showing people your strength, but from showing them your humanity. Even the Buddha didn't begin as the Buddha. He started as Siddhartha, confused prince who abandoned everything to find peace. He made mistakes. He starved himself almost to death. He tried extremes. He failed to find answers in the ways he was taught. But every failure broke something false until only truth remained. That's the gift of noble failure. It breaks what never belonged to you in the first place. The pride, the perfectionism, the masks. What's left is tender, honest, real. That's what enlightenment looks like. Not perfection, presence. So tonight, if your mind tries to remind you of every mistake you made, today gently say, thank you. Those mistakes are your teachers. Those regrets are already softening into lessons. You are not broken. You are breaking open. And in Buddhism, that's not the end of your journey. It's the most sacred beginning. And so the journey continues. If failure is sacred ground, then what follows after the fall matters even more. Because after the breaking comes the question, what now? Do we hide the cracks? Do we pretend they never happened? Or do we dare to see them, really see them as part of something whole, something meaningful? The answer lies in an old art form that holds more wisdom than words ever could. In Zen tradition, there is a practice called kintsugi, art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the damage, the cracks are honored, traced with care, and made more beautiful than before. A broken bowl does not return to what it was. It becomes something else, something that holds its story with pride. This is not just about objects, it is about the heart. Emotional scars, often buried and silenced, are the very places where transformation can live. Zen does not ask you to be unbroken. It asks you to meet your wounds with full presence, to stop waiting until you're healed enough, to live fully. The golden lines don't appear after you fix yourself. They appear when you allow your pain to be seen. When we apply this to the mind, something radical happens. We stop chasing the illusion of being untouched by life. We begin to ask, what would it mean if my anxiety, my heartbreak, my grief were not stains to scrub out, but textures to honor? Zen does not see emotional pain as a failure. It sees it as part of the pattern, a necessary element in the artwork of being human. Each scar becomes a stroke in a painting that is still unfolding. There is no pressure to rush, no need to erase. Just a call to pay attention, to respond with care. Pain becomes meaningful when it is witnessed without rejection. Kintsugi of the mind begins here not in fixing but in staying. To stay with the ache without numbing it. To stay with the memory without rewriting it. To stay with yourself, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That is the beginning of gold. In Zen, beauty is found in irregularity. The word wabi-sabi reflects this. It means appreciating the imperfect, the transient, the incomplete. This isn't just about aesthetics, it's about how we live. Most people have been taught to chase the flawless, a flawless body, a flawless past, flawless control. But this search exhausts the soul. Zen invites you to drop it, to let softness replace striving, to let your unevenness be part of your humanity. This is not passive resignation, it's deep seeing. It means when anger rises, you don't deny it, you bow to it, you learn from its fire. When sadness shows up, you don't drown in it, but you also don't shove it away. You sit beside it and listen. The cracks reveal what you care about. They speak of your depth. A person without scars is not whole, they are untested, unshaped. There's a teaching in Zen. Not knowing is most intimate. That means the mind that stops pretending it has all the answers is the one most connected to life. When you let go of the need to be perfect, your relationships change. You stop performing. You show up as you are. You stop demanding perfection from others too. You let people be messy. You let them be real. Suddenly, connection deepens. Because it's no longer based on masks, it's based on truth. This kind of openness changes how you relate to your past. Instead of seeing old pain as something to delete, you see it as something that shaped your compassion. You see the years you struggled with self-doubt as the training ground for your ability to hold space for others. You no longer view your emotional landscape as a problem. You begin to walk through it like a garden that needs tending, not fixing. And in this garden, even the weeds have wisdom. Zen practice involves tending to what's here, not what you wish was here. When your thoughts spin out, when memories sting, when you feel like you're too much or not enough, the practice is not to silence them, but to greet them like old friends. Not because they're pleasant, but because they belong. The Japanese concept of mono no aware helps here. It is the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things. When you feel broken, this truth offers comfort not because it denies your pain, but because it reminds you nothing stays fixed. Not your grief, not your guilt, not your loneliness. They pass. Slowly, sometimes quietly, but they pass. And in the passing, they make space. Space is one of the most sacred aspects of Zen. In art, it's called ma, the empty space between. In life, it's the pause before the next thought, the breath between sentences, the silence between tears. This space is not emptiness in the way we usually fear it. It's full of possibility. When you stop rushing to fill it, you realize it's where everything truly happens. Kintsugi doesn't rush the repair, neither should you. Healing that lasts is slow, honest, and humble. It respects the timeline of the body, the nervous system, the soul. You can't think your way into peace. You can only offer yourself patience and trust that in doing so, something inside begins to settle, not because it was fixed, but because it was finally seen. What would it be like to stop saying, "I should be over this by now," and instead say, "This still matters to me. Let me treat it with care." That's gold. That's kintsugi. To bring light not by erasing the shadow, but by touching it with warmth. Zen art often celebrates asymmetry. In fact, many Zen gardens are intentionally unbalanced, because imbalance reflects real life. What if your lack of balance isn't a flaw, but a sign that you're paying attention to something that matters? What if the things that knock you off center are not interruptions to your growth, but invitations to grow differently? This perspective makes it possible to honor even the pain that hasn't ended, the grief that still lingers, the questions that remain unanswered. You stop needing to package your healing as a success story. You stop waiting for the applause. Healing becomes a private, sacred, ongoing process, something between you and the present moment. Zen also reminds us that form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. This is not abstract. It means your sadness is not a solid thing. It's not who you are. It's just one appearance in the great unfolding of life. And yet, paradoxically, how you meet it, that form becomes the doorway to something spacious. You learn not to clutch at your pain, but also not to reject it. You let it pass through, like wind through leaves. You don't need to be fearless to heal. You just need to be willing to sit with discomfort, willing to not know the outcome, willing to trust that something is being reshaped in you, even if you can't see it yet. The gold doesn't show up immediately, but it's there, in the softness you develop, in the way your voice becomes gentler, in how you respond with more kindness than you used to. Zen doesn't promise to take the pain away. It teaches you to be fully alive with it. And in doing so, the pain often shifts. Not always in volume, but in meaning. What was once unbearable becomes a teacher. What was once shameful becomes a story you carry with pride. You begin to understand that scars aren't meant to disappear, they're meant to shine. Even when you feel stuck, even when you think you've made no progress, the practice is still working. The gold is still forming. Some days, your only job is to stay present, to notice your breath, to remind yourself that this moment matters, not because it's perfect, but because it's true. Zen calls us back to what is real, not to ideas of who we should be, but to the heart that beats, the lungs that breathe, the mind that learns to rest. It's not about being enlightened, it's about being honest. And honesty with yourself is the beginning of all transformation. There will be days when the cracks feel too wide, when you wish you could go back to before, but before doesn't exist anymore. And that's okay, because what's forming now is not a return to who you were. It's the birth of someone wiser, more tender, more whole. You are not a broken bowl waiting to be glued together. You are a living work of art in progress. Every scar is a stroke of gold, every flaw a mark of resilience, every emotion a color in the palette of your becoming. This is the kintsugi of the mind, not a perfect vessel, but a beautiful one that knows how to carry its story with grace, one that doesn't shine in spite of its cracks but because of them, one that is still here, still breathing, still becoming. And that is enough, more than enough. That is sacred. Even the golden cracks have a limit, because sometimes what hurts isn't just the wound, but the one carrying it. After all the mending, all the moments of softness, there's still a question that lingers quietly beneath it all. Who is the one that's broken? The answer, in Buddhist wisdom, is not what we expect, and it changes everything. The concept of anatta, or no self, is not just a philosophical idea. It is a mirror held up to the mind's deepest habit, the belief that there is a solid, lasting me that must always hold it together, the version of self that must be perfect, impressive, wise, flawless, strong, the version that panics when it falls short, that suffers not only from pain but from the belief that I am failing, I am not enough, I should be better by now. The idea of I becomes a prison. But what if that I isn't as real as it feels? The Buddha taught that what we call the self is not a fixed thing. It is a process, a collection of shifting experiences, sensations, thoughts, memories, habits, identities, all arising and falling, moment after moment. Nothing in that flow stays, nothing is solid, and so clinging to it brings suffering. Not because we're doing something wrong, but because we're holding tightly to something that won't hold still. This is not about erasing yourself, it's about loosening the grip. When you stop trying to protect an image of who you think you should be, a strange kind of peace begins to grow. You stop needing to control every feeling, you stop needing to explain every flaw. You start meeting each moment, not as the perfect me, but simply as awareness itself, open, responsive, kind. That's where self-compassion becomes more than a practice. It becomes a return to reality. Because once you stop identifying so tightly with every thought or emotion, you realize none of them are proof of your worth. A self-critical voice might say, "You're not doing enough," but without a solid self to attack, that voice loses its power. It becomes just a sound, a thought, something to observe or not, something to become. Most suffering comes from this misunderstanding, that there's a perfect version of you somewhere that you must live up to, that your sadness, your anger, your fear means you've failed. But from the lens of anatta, these experiences aren't flaws in your being, they are simply part of experience itself. They don't define a self, they just arise, stay for a while, and pass. This opens a radical space for compassion, not just for the soft, peaceful parts of yourself, but for the messy, reactive, insecure ones too. Because if there is no fixed self, there is no part of you that needs to be banished. Even your worst moments don't need to be fought. They need to be understood, met with honesty, held with care. In this way, self-compassion becomes more than soothing words. It becomes the art of not clinging to identity at all. It's not about telling yourself, "I am good," when you feel bad. It's about seeing clearly, there is a feeling here, and it's not who I am. There is a thought here, and it's not a command. There is a memory here, but it's not a cage. This clarity is liberating, Suddenly, failure doesn't mean you are a failure. Pain doesn't mean you are broken. Thoughts don't define reality. And slowly, the space between stimulus and reaction grows. You don't have to take every emotional wave personally. You start noticing how they move, how they crest and fall, like weather patterns passing through the sky. This sky-like quality of awareness is central to Buddhist insight. The sky holds all weather without clinging to any of it. Your awareness holds all experiences, joy, fear, shame, delight, but it is not reduced to any of them. You are not the storm. You are the space that allows it to pass. And yet, we've been conditioned to live as if the storm is who we are. Every time we feel overwhelmed, we think, I can't handle this. But who is the I that can't? Is it the body, the story, the mood? Buddhism encourages us to look deeply, not to dismiss the pain, but to notice how we wrap identity around it. That wrapping is what makes pain personal. That's what makes it heavier. Through anatta, you learn to see the pain without adding the extra burden of identity. You can grieve without becoming the one who is always grieving. You can be angry without becoming a bad person. You can feel fear without believing you are weak. Experience remains, but the chain of self-blame begins to fall away. This is why letting go of the perfect me is not a loss, it's a return. A return to being human without needing to be special. A return to being alive without needing to be impressive. It's not about becoming nothing. It's about becoming free. In daily life, this looks like a softening of the pressure to perform. You stop needing to be the smartest person in the room. You stop needing to appear calm when you're not. You stop measuring your growth in neat lines. You let yourself be real. Some days you'll show up grounded. Other days you'll fall apart. Both are allowed. Both are expressions of this unfolding process we call life. Relationships begin to shift too. When you stop clinging to a fixed identity, you stop needing to defend it. You become less reactive, less threatened. You can hear feedback without collapsing into shame. You can love without needing to prove your worth. You can forgive without erasing the past. That's not weakness, that's clarity. And this clarity gives rise to kindness, not the soft, fluffy kind, but the steady, grounded kind. The kind that stays present when you're hurting. The kind that holds your trembling parts with the same respect you'd offer to someone you love. Not because you are perfect, but because perfection was never the point. Anatta also helps dissolve the inner critic. That voice that says, "Why aren't you over this yet?" Or, "Everyone else has it figured out." When you remember there is no solid you to judge, the critic's story falls apart. Its power comes from the illusion of a permanent self. When that illusion fades, all that's left is a voice. And voices can be met with care. They don't need to be obeyed. This is the essence of freedom, not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of clinging. You still feel what you feel. You still face hard days, but you stop gripping them as proof of who you are. You meet each moment freshly, without dragging the past into it. You let yourself change, moment by moment, as all things do. And in that change, there is room for growth that doesn't rely on pressure. You begin to rest more deeply, not because you earned it, but because you no longer need to prove yourself worthy of it. You start doing things not to become someone better, but to care for what's here. Meditation becomes less about improvement and more about presence. Compassion becomes less about performance and more about connection. Even your spiritual path transforms. You stop trying to reach some ideal version of awakening. You let awakening happen in the quiet moments of letting go, of being enough as you are, of showing up with humility again and again, without the burden of being impressive, without the image of the awakened one to live up to. And this touches everything: your sleep, your breath, your thoughts, your fears. You start to see how often the desire for a perfect self slips into everything, how it shapes your goals, your regrets, even your dreams. And once you see it, you can choose differently. You can let your thoughts be thoughts, not proof. You can let your emotions be waves, not walls. You can let your past be part of your story, not your sentence. You can walk through life not as someone trying to maintain an identity, but as someone alive to each moment's truth. This is what anatta offers. Not emptiness in the way we fear, but space. Spaciousness to move, to breathe, to change. Space to forgive yourself for being human. Space to live without always editing yourself. Space to rest without permission. Space to begin again without needing to erase what came before. Because when you stop clinging to who you think you should be, something else begins to shine through. Not a better version of you, just presence, just awareness, just the simple, quiet dignity of being here. And that's enough. It always was. When you've let go of who you thought you had to be, something inside softens. But life doesn't always follow that softness. It moves quickly. It surprises. It aches. One moment you're calm, the next you're spinning. Even after the identity fades, even after self-compassion settles in, storms still come. And when they do, the question is not how to escape, but how to stay upright within them. This is where equanimity begins, not as detachment, not as cold distance, but as the deepest kind of balance. In Buddhist teachings, this balance is known as upekkha mind, that remains steady in the middle of the shifting world. Not because it shuts out pain or blocks emotion, but because it sees clearly without being pulled apart by what it sees. It allows joy without gripping it, pain without drowning in it. It allows reality to be what it is, without needing to twist it into comfort. Most people misunderstand this kind of balance. They think it means not feeling, but upekkha is not numbness. It is the exact opposite. It is full presence without collapse. It's what happens when you can touch grief and not be taken under by it. When you can face your body's breaking points and still return to breath. When you can sit with fear and not flinch away from it or call it wrong. It's emotional clarity, born not from control, but from wisdom. That wisdom comes from seeing the truth of change, that no feeling stays. That every wave, no matter how strong, eventually meets the shore. Upekkha arises when you stop clinging to how things were or how they should be, and start staying with how they are. And this becomes especially powerful when you feel broken physically, emotionally, spiritually, because brokenness tempts you to give up. It whispers that the balance is gone for good. But upekkha teaches you how to stay even then, especially then. The core of this staying is not found in effort, but in understanding. You begin to notice that reactions come and go, that even overwhelm has a rhythm, that your mind, left untangled, knows how to return to center. The practice is not about suppressing the storm, it's about not believing you are the storm. You are the one watching it pass. That shift from identification to observationis, not just mental, it changes your nervous system. When you meet pain without tightening, when you meet chaos without rejecting it, your body learns safety again. You don't need to fix the chaos to find peace. You need to relate to it differently. That difference is what breaks the cycle of reactivity. Upekkha also brings freedom from emotional perfectionism. It gives you permission to feel what you feel without being owned by it. Some days, you'll feel balanced. Other days, your voice might tremble, your thoughts might race. Equanimity doesn't judge that. It simply says, stay present, stay open, let the waves come, let them pass. This open quality makes space for others, too. When you meet your own chaos with steadiness, you stop demanding others be calm for your comfort. You begin to hold space for their storms without trying to fix them. You offer quiet presence instead of pressure. This changes relationships. It creates trust. Because people sense when you're not afraid of their pain. They feel safer being real around you. And in moments of physical struggle, when the body aches, When illness comes, when energy disappears, Upekkha becomes a companion. It doesn't pretend that pain is easy, but it reminds you that even discomfort can be met with grace, that the body may be limited, but the heart can remain open, that you don't need to be strong to be steady, you only need to stop fighting the tide. Equanimity teaches patience, the waiting kind, but the resting kind, the kind that stops pushing against life and starts moving with it. You don't have to fix everything to find your ground. You only have to stop abandoning yourself in the process. Upekkha keeps you rooted there. That rooting is not rigid, it's flexible, like a tree in the wind, strong but yielding, grounded but not stiff. When thoughts pull you in every direction, when emotions rise like fire, Upekkha doesn't try to extinguish them. It watches, it breathes, it remembers. This too is part of the practice. And this remembering shifts your focus. Instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" you begin asking, "How can I stay with this more kindly?" That single question can change your entire experience. It brings compassion into the center of your struggle. It removes blame. It dissolves shame. And it makes space for peace, even when peace seems far away. That space is what makes Upekkha different from detachment. It doesn't cut you off. It connects you deeper. But it changes how you connect. You are no longer pulled around by every wave of emotion. You are no longer desperate for control. You let things be what they are, and in doing so, you become available to what's real. In moments of loss, this availability matters. When grief rips through your chest, when plans fall apart, when someone you love leaves, you don't need empty comfort. You need grounding, a place to land. Upekkha becomes that landing. It whispers, "You don't have to run." It holds space for heartbreak without panic, and over time, the heart begins to trust that it can survive what it once thought it couldn't. This kind of balance is not a final state. It's a practice, a path, something you return to again and again, every time the world shakes you. Every time your own thoughts try to convince you that you are too much or not enough. You pause, you breathe, you remember, this is not a flaw, this is a moment. And moments shift. Equanimity also gives you freedom from extremes. You no longer swing wildly between hope and despair, success and failure, praise and blame. You stop chasing the high and fearing the low. You start noticing what's beneath both. That stillness, that awareness, that quiet knowing that doesn't change with the weather. This stability is not born from ignoring pain. It's born from knowing that pain is not the whole story, that there is more to you than this moment, that what feels unbearable now may become the soil of something wiser later, and that you don't need to see the outcome to stay present for the unfolding. And when you feel like giving up, equanimity doesn't shame you. It simply stays. That's what makes it so powerful. It's not the loud force that pulls you back up. It's the silent strength that says, "I'm here, no matter what. I don't need you to be better. I just need you to stay." That staying is sacred. In a world obsessed with fixing, with progress, with outcomes, choosing to remain present with imperfection is revolutionary. To not escape your discomfort, but breathe with it. To not chase relief, but make space for what's true. That's the kind of strength that changes you. It doesn't look like much from the outside. A slow breath, a relaxed jaw, a choice to respond instead of react. But inside, it is everything. It is the shift from war to peace, from struggle to space, from fear to knowing that you can survive even this. Upekkha doesn't make your life neat. It makes your mind steady, so that no matter how messy things get, you remain here, awake, present, grounded, not because it's easy, but because it's true. Because even in chaos, there is something in you that knows how to return. And that knowing is not far away. It's here now, beneath the noise, beneath the story, beneath the broken pieces, waiting for you to remember. This is what it means to be whole, not unshaken, but unafraid to shake, not invincible, but fully alive. And that is more than enough. Balance isn't the end, it's a doorway, because even when the mind steadies, even when the breath returns, there's something deeper asking to be met. The pain that still lingers, the shame that quietly hides, the parts of yourself you've tried to ignore, bury, or silence. You've learned how to sit with chaos. Now it's time to look directly into what you've called ugly. Not to fix it, but to finally understand why it matters. Buddhist teachings never promised a path that bypasses pain. In fact, they lead us straight into it, not to suffer for the sake of suffering, but because the truth lives there. One of the clearest metaphors in the Dharma is the lotus flower. It blooms in mud, not in clean water. The richer the soil in darkness, the more brilliant the blossom. That image isn't poetic fluff. It's a teaching about where awakening really begins. Awakening doesn't start in moments of perfection. It doesn't come after everything is healed or resolved. It begins in the exact places you wish it wouldn't, in the failures, the regrets, the awkward memories you flinch away from. The muddy parts of life are not detours on the path. They are the path. This changes how we relate to discomfort. Most of the time, when emotional pain arises, resentment, grief, jealousy, confusion, we label it as wrong. We try to push it away or cover it up with spiritual language. But the practice is not about feeling good. It's about being real. It's about turning toward the places that feel raw and asking, what's underneath this? And often, what you find is not weakness. It's the seed of something meaningful. Every painful emotion carries information. Anger may reveal your boundaries. Sadness might point to something that matters deeply. Guilt could be a signal that your actions are misaligned with your values. These feelings are not flaws. They are entry points, messengers that something within you wants to be seen and integrated. But to hear that message, you have to stop treating your inner world like something to be managed. You have to stop performing healing and start embodying it. That means letting the tears come. That means admitting what hurts. That means telling the truth even when it doesn't sound wise, spiritual, or peaceful. In Buddhist practice, there's a term for this deep honesty, sakha, meaning truthfulness. Truthfulness is not limited to words. It's the act of seeing what is without embellishment, without denial. To see your pain without hiding from it. To name your fear without judgment. To hold your contradictions without needing to resolve them. That is truth. And it's the foundation of any real awakening. There's a cultural habit of wanting healing to look clean, of wanting awakening to feel serene. But serenity isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of full-hearted honesty. It's when you can sit in the middle of your most painful emotion and not flinch. Not because you've numbed out, but because you've learned how to stay. The lotus doesn't grow by avoiding the mud. It draws nutrients from it, just like your practice draws strength from what you've survived. Your trauma, your loneliness, your failure, they aren't obstacles to spiritual life. They're what shape your understanding. They're what soften your heart. They're what deepen your compassion for others who are still lost in their own pain. And that compassion isn't something you perform. It arises naturally when you stop needing to be better than anyone else. When you stop pretending you've figured it out. When you start meeting people not from your polished self, but from your broken open self. That's where real connection begins. Not in shared success, but in shared humanity. There's a Zen saying, "No mud, no lotus." It's not a slogan, it's a warning and a comfort. If you skip the mud, you skip the growth. If you run from the parts of yourself that ache, you will never know what they were trying to teach you. And they were always trying to teach you something. They weren't there to punish you. They were there to lead you home. And home, in this path, doesn't look like endless peace or eternal joy. It looks like presence. It looks like being able to sit with your history, your scars, your flaws, and still breathe. Still open your heart. Still care. That is awakening, not the end of difficulty, but the beginning of not being afraid of it anymore. That fearlessness doesn't arrive in one moment. It builds slowly, through 1,000 choices to stay. To stay when you feel unworthy. To stay when everything inside you wants to run. To stay with the parts of your life you've called a mistake and ask, what did this show me? You won't always get a clear answer, but asking the question itself brings light into the dark. In Buddhism, light is not something outside of you. It's the clarity that comes when you stop covering things up, when you let the rawness speak, when you let pain have a voice, not as your identity, but as your guide. Even the Buddha faced the mud. Before awakening, he sat under the Bodhi tree and faced Marathi tempter, the embodiment of fear, doubt, and illusion. Mara wasn't defeated by force. He was met with presence. The Buddha simply said, "I see you." That seeing is what transformed the moment. Not denial, not resistance. Recognition. You are asked to do the same, not to fight your darkness, but to stop hiding from it, to look it in the eye and say, "You don't define me, but I won't reject you either." That's not weakness. That's spiritual maturity. And that maturity is not loud. It doesn't always look wise from the outside. Sometimes it looks like crying on the floor. Sometimes it looks like canceling your plans because your nervous system is frayed. Sometimes it looks like pausing in the middle of an argument and saying, "I'm overwhelmed. I need a moment." That's not failure. That's awareness. When you allow space for your raw experience, something unexpected happens. Shame begins to loosen. You stop believing you're the only one who feels this way. You stop believing that if people saw your brokenness, they'd walk away. And in that space, the heart starts to trust again. Not in perfection, but in presence. Presence is what transforms, not the story of what happened, not the image of who you wish you were, but your willingness to stand in the middle of your own life and say, "I'm here for all of it." That's what turns mud into nourishment. That's what turns scars into teachers. That's what makes awakening possible, no, as a destination, but as a way of being. And being awake doesn't mean being above pain. It means letting your pain deepen your capacity to love, letting your losses soften your grip, letting your fear be the doorway to your courage. Awakening grows roots in the ground you thought was too messy, too broken, too dark. And when you start to see yourself this way, you begin to see others differently too. You stop expecting them to have it together. You start welcoming their flaws, their cracks, their contradictions. You don't need them to be perfect. You just want them to be real, because now you know that's where the light lives. So don't wait until you're healed to live. Don't wait until you feel whole to begin. The path doesn't start at the mountaintop. It starts in the mud, in the confusion, in the parts of yourself you've tried to hide. The path asks only this: come as you are. Let the mud be your ground. Let your heartbreak be your teacher. Let your pain soften you, not shatter you. Because in this practice, the very things you thought disqualified you, they're the things that carry you forward. No mud, no lotus, no struggle, no depth, no darkness, no light. And still you bloom, not in spite of the mud. Because of it, even the lotus has roots tangled in what is messy, uneven, and unseen, just like the path itself, just like those we learn from. Because no matter how deep your intention to grow, sooner or later you will look up to someone with more experience, more knowledge, or more presence. And then, one day, you'll see a flaw, a contradiction, a shadow, something they did or didn't do that shakes your trust. That moment matters, not because it breaks the journey, but because it shows you what it's really made of. The idea of a perfect teacher has followed spiritual seekers for centuries. There's comfort in thinking someone has already found all the answers, that they've reached a place where confusion ends, pain stops, and clarity never wavers. But Buddhism never asked you to idolize anyone. The Buddha himself warned against blind devotion. He didn't ask to be worshipped. He asked to be questioned, tested, understood through your own direct experience. When you see someone as flawless, you build an image, you attach meaning to their presence, you place your hope into their words. And then, when the image cracks, you feel betrayed. Not always because of what they did, but because of what you projected. That's not your fault. It's a human instinct to want someone to hold the light steady for you. But the truth is, even those who teach can stumble. And if your peace depends on their perfection, it was never steady to begin with. That doesn't mean teachers don't matter. They do, deeply. A good teacher can open your mind, soften your heart, and show you corners of the path you might never reach alone. But that value doesn't require them to be spotless. It requires them to be honest, and it requires you to relate to them with clarity instead of fantasy. Learning from an imperfect teacher means practicing discernment. It means looking beyond charisma and eloquence to see what's actually being transmitted. It means noticing not just what they say, but how they live, how they treat others, how they hold discomfort, how they respond to criticism. Not to judge them, but to ground yourself, so that you don't confuse power with wisdom, so that you don't trade your integrity for their approval. Sometimes, a teacher offers a beautiful teaching, but fails to embody it fully. That gap can feel disorienting. You hear truth in their words, but see contradiction in their behavior. In that space, cynicism often grows. You might feel disappointed, even betrayed. But before you abandon the path entirely, pause. Ask what the teaching gave you, separate from who delivered it. Wisdom is still wisdom even if spoken by someone who hasn't mastered it yet. This is where maturity in practice begins to grow, when you can receive value from someone without needing to idealize them, when you can appreciate what was offered without excusing harm, when you can stay grounded in your own values, even when others waver in theirs. Buddhist tradition includes many stories of flawed masters, teachers with tempers, blind spots, pride. But instead of erasing those stories, the tradition often keeps them visible, because they teach something essential. The path is not about becoming perfect. It's about waking up to what is real. Sometimes, what is real includes contradiction. Sometimes, it includes repair. That repair is part of your practice too. If a teacher disappoints you, notice what it stirs in you. Do you feel shame for having trusted them? Anger at yourself? Confusion about what's true? Don't rush to escape those feelings. Stay with them. They are part of the learning. They reveal what you placed on the teacher and what you might still be avoiding in yourself. Projection is powerful. We often assign to spiritual leaders qualities we feel disconnected from. If they seem peaceful, we assume they never feel rage. If they speak clearly, we assume they never doubt. But these are illusions. No one escapes being human, not even those who have meditated for decades or worn robes their entire lives. What matters is not that they never fall, but how they show up after they do. In your own practice, you'll stumble too. You'll say things you regret. You'll make choices from fear. You'll act in ways that contradict what you believe. If you expect teachers to rise above all of that, you might start believing you're unfit for the path when you make your own mistakes. But that's not true. Awakening doesn't mean never falling. It means seeing clearly when you don't, returning with honesty. That return is where your power lives. Not in pretending you never broke your own values, but in facing the break without denial. Some teachers model that return. They admit when they've harmed. They step back. They listen. They apologize. That doesn't erase what happened, but it shows that humility and growth are always possible, and that's a teaching in itself. When a teacher refuses accountability, when they hide behind their position or silence those who question them, That's not awakening. That's fear disguised as certainty. It's okay to step away from that. It's okay to question the lineage, the system, or the structure that allowed harm. Buddhism invites inquiry. It doesn't demand silence. But don't let disappointment become your identity. Don't let betrayal become your compass. Hold your experience fully, then decide what you want to carry forward, what you keep, what you release. Let your relationship to teachers evolve as your understanding deepens. Some will guide you for a season. Some will walk beside you for life. Some will teach you through failure more than success. And sometimes, the most unexpected people offer the clearest reflections. A child asking an honest question. A friend naming what you didn't want to hear. A stranger's kindness that softens your grip. The Dharma lives beyond titles, beyond robes, beyond credentials. The moment you see clearly, that's the teaching. You don't need to wait for someone else to validate your progress. You don't need to be chosen by a master to walk the path. The Buddha taught that you are your own refuge, that your clarity matters, that your sincerity is enough. Teachers can help profoundly, but you must walk, you must choose. And when you do, remember that everyone you meet is on their own version of this journey. Even those who seem far ahead may be working through shadows you can't see. Even those who stumble might carry light in ways they don't recognize. Wisdom and brokenness often live side by side. The question is whether you're willing to stay present for both. Staying present doesn't mean tolerating harm. It means responding with awareness. It means speaking up when something's wrong, not from anger but from alignment. It means honoring your own limits. It means trusting your gut when something feels off. That trust is part of the path too. And so is compassion for your teachers, for their humanness, for your own projections, for the part of you that wanted someone else to carry the burden of truth. That part isn't foolish, it's tender. It wants safety, it wants certainty, but the path doesn't offer certainty, it offers presence, and presence is enough. Presence allows you to hold complexity, to see the beauty in a teaching, even if the teacher fell short, to receive the value without excusing the harm, to name the truth without collapsing into bitterness. This balance takes time, it takes practice, but it creates depth. The deepest teachers are often the ones who never ask to be seen as perfect. They point you back to your own experience, they celebrate your insight, they aren't afraid of your questions. They don't compete for control, they remind you that this path belongs to no one person, it belongs to truth itself. And truth is alive, breathing, moving through every experience, even the ones that hurt, especially the ones that hurt. That's how you learn what wisdom really feels like. Not just when everything is harmonious, but when things get messy, and you keep showing up anyway. You can walk with teachers, you can walk without them, you can outgrow some, you can return to others. But through it all, the path is yours. Not because you've mastered it, but because you're still walking, still learning, still listening not just to voices outside, but to the quiet knowing inside that says, this is your way, stay with it. Even when you're disillusioned, even when you feel lost, even when those you looked up to let you down, the Dharma doesn't disappear. It lives in your breath, in your choices, in your courage to begin again. You don't need a perfect guide. You need your own honesty. You need your willingness to learn from every unloading the ones who disappointed you, including yourself. Because if awakening depends on only the flawless, no one would reach it. But it doesn't. It depends on truth. And truth is still here. So are you. Even as you learn to walk the path without idols, something quieter remains. Not the teacher's flaws, but your own disappointment. The sting of disillusionment doesn't vanish when you step into wisdom. Sometimes it deepens, turning inward. You start to notice a deeper discomfort beneath everything, a quiet ache that doesn't come from being wronged, but from wanting things to be different. That ache, Buddhism calls dukkha. It is the most honest part of the human experience, and it holds the key to understanding why perfection hurts so much. Dukkha is often translated as suffering, but its meaning goes further. It points to the friction between life as it is and life as we want it to be. It shows up when something doesn't go according to plan, but also when it does and still doesn't feel like enough. It shows up when you lose something and when you cling so tightly that even what you have begins to feel fragile. Dukkha is not punishment. It's not a flaw in you. It is the tension created when you resist reality. At the heart of that resistance is perfection. Not always the dramatic kind. Sometimes it's subtly quiet belief that you should be more patient, more successful, more at peace by now. A standard you carry like a shadow. You may not call it perfection. You may just think of it as responsibility or discipline or self-improvement. But it functions the same way. It creates pressure. It creates comparison. It creates suffering. Buddhist teachings don't ask you to get rid of dukkha. They ask you to see it. Because when you turn toward that tightness, the urge to be better, the pain of not being enough, you start to see the attachment underneath. The grasping for a version of yourself, or others, or life, that matches a story in your mind. And the moment you see that grasping clearly, you open a new door, not toward more effort, but toward letting go. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means loosening your grip on how things should be, so you can meet them as they are. The shoulds are often invisible, passed down by family, culture, teachers, even your own ideals. They live inside your language, words like, I must, I always, I never, I can't be like that. Each phrase becomes a mirror, showing you what you're unwilling to accept. And acceptance here is not passive, it's powerful. It's the only thing strong enough to interrupt the cycle of suffering. Because when you accept that something is imperfect, you stop demanding that it conform to your ideas. You stop exhausting yourself in the pursuit of what can't be held, and slowly the pressure begins to dissolve. This pressure exists everywhere. It shows up when you meditate and expect a certain result. It shows up when you compare your growth to someone else's. It shows up when you want to be calm, but rage appears instead. And every time it does, it tells you a lie that there's something wrong with your experience, something to correct, something to fix before you can rest. But Buddhism turns that upside down. It teaches that dukkha is not an interruption to your peace. It is the signal that you are clinging to an ideal that isn't real. In that way, suffering becomes a teacher, a mirror. It shows you what you believe about worth, control, and identity. Not as judgment, but as invitation. The invitation is to pause and look honestly. Where are you still trying to be perfect? Where are you still measuring yourself against a standard that isn't kind? Where are you waiting for conditions to be right before you let yourself feel peace? Sometimes the belief in perfection is so deep, you don't notice it until it breaks. You have a plan, a role, a goal, and it collapses. You're left with nothing to hold on to, and you feel exposed. But that exposure is sacred. It reveals the quiet demand you placed on yourself to be invulnerable, to never need help, to always rise without stumbling, and it gives you the chance to finally release it. Because perfection isn't real, and neither is the safety it promises. No amount of achievement can protect you from pain. No level of spiritual discipline can guarantee peace. What brings peace is intimacy with reality, with your body, with your limits, with your emotions, with your failures. All of it. This intimacy starts when you stop trying to solve dukkha and start learning from it. When you stop turning suffering into a sign of personal weakness and start seeing it as the moment truth becomes visible. That truth is usually uncomfortable. It reveals your expectations, your attachments, your hidden rules about what life owes you, or who you must become to be loved. Letting go of those rules isn't easy. Sometimes it feels like losing a part of yourself. But what you're losing is only an imager story. What remains is something quieter, more honest. A self that doesn't need to prove anything. A self that can breathe without earning it. That breath is your anchor. In the moments when dukkha tightens your chest or floods your mind with doubt, the breath brings you back. Not to fix the pain, but to stay present with it. You start to notice how often you're adding weight with your thoughts. This shouldn't be happening. I failed again. I'll never get this right. Those thoughts don't come from truth. They come from the mind's habit of chasing perfection. Breaking that habit doesn't mean rejecting your desire to grow. It means seeing growth differently, not as a straight line upward, but as a process that includes messiness, forgetting, and beginning again. Every backward step is not a sign you're broken. It's a reminder that even imperfection can hold wisdom. That wisdom includes knowing how to rest. Perfection never lets you rest. It tells you there's always something to improve, that even your rest should be productive, that even your healing should be efficient. But rest is resistance. It's a way of saying, I am already enough, even now, even like this. This enoughness is the heart of liberation. The Buddha taught that suffering ends not when life becomes flawless, but when the mind stops clinging. When the mind sees that all things are impermanent, conditioned, and not self, it softens. It stops fighting change. It stops trying to control what can't be held. And what follows is not apathy, it's tenderness. When you stop demanding perfection from yourself, you become more gentle with others. You stop needing them to act a certain way to make you feel okay. You stop blaming them for not living up to your ideals. You let them be human too. That's how compassion deepens, not from effort, but from understanding. Understanding that everyone suffers, that everyone carries a story of not being enough, that most people are clinging to something they believe will save them. And when you see that clearly, your heart opens. You begin to care, not because it's your duty, but because you recognize yourself in them. This recognition is the beginning of community. True community. Not one built on shared beliefs or goals, but on shared imperfection, shared humanity. When suffering is no longer hidden, it becomes the thread that connects instead of divides. And that connection helps you remember, you don't have to carry this alone. The path was never meant to be walked in isolation. Your dukkha is not a private shame. It's a part of the human condition, one that everyone navigates, whether they speak about it or not. So speak gently, to yourself, to others. Speak as if everyone is holding something fragile, because they are. And when you forget, when you fall back into chasing perfection, return to the breath. Return to what's here, this moment, this body, this breath. That's where freedom lives. Not in having no pain, but in no longer fearing it. Not in achieving control, but in releasing the need for it. Not in erasing dukkha, but in learning to see it clearly. Dukkha is not your enemy. It's not a failure. It's not a flaw to cover up. It's a mirror, one that reflects your deepest attachments, your silent hopes, your buried fears. And when you're ready to look, really look, you start to see what lies beneath all of it. Not a broken person, not a failed version of who you should have been, but a whole being learning how to live without clinging. And that is the beginning of peace. The mirror of suffering reveals more than pain. It reveals habit, the ways you respond before you even know you're responding, the thoughts that show up on repeat, always whispering the same messages. The actions you take without thinking, not because you chose them, but because they were carved into you by years of repetition. These grooves of mind and behavior aren't just patterns, they're imprints. In Buddhist psychology, they're called samskaras, and they shape the cycle of samsara, endless turning of craving, aversion, and confusion that keeps suffering alive. Samskaras are not punishments, they are residues, formed by the way you meet each moment, formed by the way you've met countless moments before now. They don't begin with dramatic events. Often they begin quietly. A thought not examined, a feeling pushed away, a reaction repeated so often it becomes automatic. And once that happens, the mind moves toward it without effort, like water flowing in a familiar channel. That channel deepens with use. Each time you respond from fear, the fear feels more natural. Each time you judge yourself, the judgment feels more real. This is how samsara is sustained not by external suffering alone, but by internal loops that reinforce themselves. Thought becomes belief. Belief becomes identity. Identity shapes how you act. Action deepens the imprint. The cycle continues. But what if those same loops could be used to wake up? That's where the practice begins to shift. When you stop seeing your flaws as fixed and start seeing them as patterns, patterns are not who you are. They're what the mind does when it forgets its freedom. And if they were formed through repetition, they can be softened the same way, not all at once, but gradually, not by force, but by new choices made again and again. In Indian Buddhist psychology, transformation happens not by erasing samskaras, but by purifying them, bringing awareness into their depth. This awareness doesn't judge, it watches. It studies the conditions that gave birth to the pattern. It asks what this habit was trying to protect. Often, the mind clings to what once offered safety, even if it now causes harm. The same anger that distances others may have once shielded you from vulnerability. The same self-criticism that weighs you down may have once been a way to survive expectations. Seeing this clearly changes how you relate to your flaws. You stop calling them defects. You start calling them adaptations, not because they're helpful now, but because they made sense once. And when the pattern is seen with compassion, something softens. The urge to punish yourself begins to loosen. The possibility of change begins to open. Modern neuroscience confirms this. The brain is plastic, not fixed. Neural pathways can change, but they don't change through intensity. They change through gentle repetition. A new response, practiced slowly and consistently, creates a new groove, and the old one weakens not because it's fought, but because it's no longer fed. This means that imperfect living, the times when you catch yourself repeating the same reaction, the same fear, the same withdrawal, is not failure. It's the opportunity to see the samskara in real time. And when you see it, you have a chance to respond differently, maybe not perfectly, but even a small shift begins a new path. These small shifts matter more than you think. They don't feel profound in the moment. A breath before reacting, a pause before speaking, a moment of kindness toward yourself after falling into the same habit again. These choices feel insignificant compared to the weight of the past. But over time, they reshape the internal world. They teach the nervous system that safety doesn't always require defense, that love doesn't always require perfection. And in that teaching, samsara begins to crack, not with force, but with awareness, not with a single insight, but with many quiet recognitions. This is the truth that ancient Buddhist psychology shares with modern science, that healing is cumulative, that transformation comes not from pushing harder, but from staying with what is, over and over again. Imperfect living becomes the ground for this kind of change, because when you try to control every experience, you stay trapped in the old grooves. But when you let yourself be real, messy, reactive, inconsistent, you bring the patterns into the light, and only what is seen can be understood. Only what is understood can be shifted. So every time you repeat an old behavior with awareness, you're already changing it. Even if the behavior doesn't stop yet, the awareness itself is the interruption. It says, I see this, and that seeing is powerful, because samskaras thrive in the dark. Awareness brings light. Light doesn't always erase the pattern, but it brings choice. Choice is what transforms samsara, because the cycle depends on reactivity. It depends on you forgetting you have a choice. When you remember, the loop weakens. You may still feel the urge, but you're no longer lost in it. Some habits run deep, shaped by childhood, shaped by trauma, shaped by years of believing you had no other option. Those habits deserve patience. They deserve compassion. They are not undone by force. They are unwound slowly, like a knot, each layer met with kindness, each layer offering a story you had forgotten you were still carrying. That story matters, not so you can hold on to it, but so you can see how it shaped you, so you can thank what once protected you and let it rest, so you can make space for a new way of being, one that doesn't require the same defenses, one that lets you act from presence instead of memory. Presence is the medicine, not presence as in focus or intensity, but presence as in intimacy with what's happening, feeling your body in moments of discomfort, noticing the thought that wants to spiral, holding the emotion without naming it good or bad. Presence says, I am with you to every part of your experience, and that companionship is what breaks the cycle. Because most samskaras were formed in loneliness. In moments when you had to hold pain by yourself, the body remembers that isolation. The mind repeats it. But the practice of staying brings in something new. It brings connection. It brings the message, you don't have to go through this the same way anymore. And slowly, you begin to trust that. You begin to act differently, not because the old pattern is gone, but because you're no longer afraid of it. You don't need to control it. You just need to meet it. Again and again. With breath, with softness, with willingness. This willingness is the core of the path. The willingness to live imperfectly, to fall back into habit and still choose to return. To know that perfection was never the goal, freedom was. And freedom comes not from never repeating old pain, but from relating to it with new eyes. These new eyes come from practice, from your willingness to begin again, to face what you'd rather avoid, to forgive what once defined you, to touch the past not with blame, but with curiosity. That curiosity opens the mind. It makes space for questions. What am I believing right now? What am I avoiding? What does this pattern ask of me? And what else could I offer instead? You don't have to answer perfectly. The act of asking is enough, because it shifts the mind from reactivity to reflection. It pauses the loop. And in that pause, a new pathway opens. That's how samsara becomes samskara, and how samskara becomes a path to freedom. The very patterns that once caused suffering become the places where wisdom grows, not because they were ever good, but because they are now seen, held, transformed through attention. Attention that does not reject, that does not demand speed, that does not shame you for having habits you didn't choose. Attention that says, you are allowed to learn slowly. You are allowed to change without perfection. That permission is powerful. It creates the safety that the old patterns never had. It tells your nervous system, you don't have to defend against life anymore. You can be here. You can trust what's unfolding, even when it's uncertain, even when the old pull still tugs at you. You will forget. You will repeat. You will fall into the same story, sometimes many times. But now you know how to return. And that return is the real practice. It is the path through samsara. It is the transformation of samskara. It is not a quick fix. It is a slow remembering. And every time you remember, the mind changes, the pattern softens, the loop weakens. You reclaim your agency, not by becoming perfect, but by being awake within the imperfection. That is how change happens. That is how freedom begins. Even the deepest patterns can shift when they're met with presence. You begin to see that what once felt permanent is only the echo of something that didn't know it was allowed to change. But there's another layer waiting, one that lives outside your personal history, beyond the self, beyond the mind. It's not about habits. It's about how the world sees you, and how you see others. The places society has trained you to look away from, the people it told you don't matter, the parts of life called useless, impure, or broken. The Buddha never looked away. In fact, he walked straight toward what others rejected. In early Buddhist texts, the Buddha did not surround himself only with the learned or the powerful. He didn't seek the company of kings or scholars to validate his wisdom. He sought truth wherever it revealed itself, and often it revealed itself in the people the world called untouchable. Beggars, thieves, outcasts, those with visible illness or hidden shame. He saw them not as a burden to be avoided, but as beings worthy of presence, worthy of teaching, worthy of liberation. The story of Sunita, a low-caste street sweeper, offers one of the clearest examples. In his culture, Sunita was considered impure simply by birth. He lived on the edge of society, unseen and avoided. Yet when the Buddha saw him, he didn't step aside. He didn't offer pity. He offered ordination. He offered the robe. And Sunita became a monk respected, practiced, and fully awakened. The transformation wasn't just his, it was a radical statement. Holiness is not confined to status. It does not follow hierarchy. It rises from truth. This truth challenges the core of how worth is usually measured. The world is quick to label people based on appearance, income, or usefulness. It praises those who produce, who conform, who shine. But sacredness, in the Buddhist sense, is not something earned. It is recognized. It is already present in every being, even when covered by dirt, disease, or despair. That recognition is a practice. It takes effort to unlearn the conditioned reflex to judge, to stop evaluating people based on their speech, clothing, behavior, or what they can give you, and to begin seeing beyond the surface. Buddhist practice invites this not a passive tolerance, but an active respect, an honoring of the sacred in every life, no matter how broken it appears to be. The Buddha's actions were not symbolic. He sat with those who were dying in the street. He touched those others would not touch. He spoke to those considered too low to even make eye contact. He didn't need them to improve first. He didn't wait for them to earn his compassion. He gave it freely, without hesitation, without moral calculation, because he saw what was underneath. What he saw was Buddha nature, the innate capacity for awakening present in all beings. This is not an abstract idea, it's a shift in perception. It means that even the person society forgets is no less capable of transformation than the one society glorifies. That the potential for wisdom is not based on education or status, but on presence, on the willingness to see clearly. And yet, many people still carry the belief that they are too far gone, that their suffering disqualifies them from spiritual growth, that their mistakes or trauma make them impure. That awakening is for those with clean records and quiet minds. But this is not the Dharma. The Dharma does not ask you to erase your past. It asks you to meet it fully and to walk forward anyway. The discarded parts of society reflect the discarded parts within yourself, the ones you've labeled unworthy, the emotions you silence, the memories you hide, the stories you don't want others to know. But if the Buddha could walk toward the leper and see a being capable of liberation, then perhaps you can walk toward your own inner outcasts and offer the same. This isn't sentimental, it's rigorous. It asks you to look closely at how you relate to those who make you uncomfortable. Do you turn away from the homeless person on the street? Do you flinch at the sight of someone who acts unpredictably? Do you judge someone for how little they seem to contribute? These reactions aren't wrong. They're learned, but they can be unlearned. To see the sacred in the discarded, you must slow down. You must listen beyond appearances. You must soften your certainty about who deserves your attention. You must be willing to be changed by what you encounter. This isn't about saviorism. It's not about fixing anyone. It's about meeting them as equals on the path. fellow travelers, fellow humans. Modern systems often build worth around productivity. If someone can't work, can't contribute, or can't participate the way society expects, they're often pushed aside. But Buddhist teachings do not follow that logic. They see dignity in existence itself, in breath, in awareness, in presence. You don't have to do anything to deserve respect. You are already worthy of care. This teaching goes both ways. When you begin to treat others with this kind of reverence, you also begin to treat yourself differently. The parts of you that don't perform well, the parts that don't know how to respond, the parts that have failed again and again, you stop trying to erase them. You start honoring their place in your story. The world may reward your success, but your healing begins when you start caring for what you once tried to hide. When you start seeing your pain not as a flaw but as a doorway. When you realize that the most profound transformation often begins in the lowest place, that the things you thought made you unworthy are what give your practice depth. Sacredness isn't found only in temples or rituals. It lives in hospital rooms, on sidewalks, in prisons, in shelters, in mental health clinics, in the awkward silences between people who don't know what to say. It shows up where there's vulnerability. It grows where there's humility. It stays when there's no reason to stay, except love. That love is not about feeling good. It's about staying close to the discomfort, to the grief, to the people who show you what you've been afraid to face. When you do that, something opens. Not because they changed, but because you did. Your perception widened. Your heart remembered that it was built to include what the world leaves out. The Buddha did not see impurity. He saw suffering. And he met suffering with presence. He did not fix everyone's circumstances. He offered something deeper, a path that was open to all, no matter where they started. That path still exists. And it's not just for those who look like they belong on it. It's for the lost, the rejected, the hurting, the confused. It's for you in the moments you feel like a burden, and it's for the person you avoid, thinking they're too far gone. The Dharma does not exclude, but your conditioning might. And that's why this teaching matters, because it asks you to question your reflexes, to examine your biases, to turn toward what you've been taught, to reject and find the sacred waiting there. Every time you choose presence over prejudice, you walk the path more fully. Every time you see someone as more than their appearance, their behavior, their story, you strengthen your capacity for awakening. Because awakening is not a personal achievement, it's a collective remembering that no one is beyond dignity, that no one is separate from truth. That includes you, especially when you feel discarded by life, when you're exhausted, unseen, or stuck, when your contributions feel small or invisible. You are not outside the circle. You are the circle. You carry the same light that shines in everyone else, even when it's hard to feel, even when it's buried under layers of pain. So, let this be the practice, to look where others don't, to listen where others rush, to care when it's inconvenient, to stay when it's uncomfortable, to see the sacred in what seems broken. Not because it's sentimental, but because it's true. You don't have to fix the world, but you can stop looking away from it. That is the beginning of compassion, and compassion is the beginning of everything. Seeing the sacred in what's forgotten reminds you that wholeness is not something to achieve, it's something to recognize in the places you once overlooked. But recognizing it is only the first step. The next step is giving from it. Not after you've cleaned yourself up, not after you've found peace or stability or certainty. The next step is giving anyway. Because in Buddhism, generosity dana was never meant to come only from abundance. It was always meant to come from the heart, even when the heart feels incomplete. You don't have to wait until you have more to offer. That's one of the oldest myths. You're taught to believe generosity should flow from fullness, that you should give only when you're steady, secure, healed, but that belief delays the practice of giving until some imagined future, and that future often never comes. Real generosity starts now, right where you are tired, unsure, grieving, confused. Not because it's about performance, but because it's about connection. Dana, at its root, is not a transaction, it's a release. It is the letting go of something you've called mine for the benefit of someone else. This doesn't have to be money or things. It can be time, attention, a kind word, a listening presence, a gesture of care that costs you something, not in a damaging way, but in a way that invites you out of self-protection and into mutual presence. The power of Dana lies in the willingness to give even when something feels unresolved, to speak a truth even when your voice shakes, to offer care even when you're still learning how to care for yourself. That's not recklessness, that's courage. That's the courage to be generous without needing to appear perfect first. This kind of giving breaks the pattern of withholding. Withholding doesn't always come from greed. Often it comes from fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of being depleted, fear of being judged. But dana, when practiced from the heart, invites a new relationship to fear. It doesn't pretend fear isn't there. It simply doesn't let fear lead. You can give while afraid. You can give while uncertain. You can give without having it all figured out. That's part of the gift. The vulnerability itself becomes the offering. And people feel that. They feel when your presence is real. They feel when your generosity comes from your raw, honest self, not your polished one. Dana isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it stretches you. Sometimes it confronts your ideas about worth. You might think, I'm not ready to give, or what I have isn't enough, or someone else could do this better. But those thoughts are part of the practice. They reveal where your giving is still tied to self-image, where it's still entangled with the need to be seen a certain way. Letting go of that need opens something deeper. You start giving not to prove your goodness, but to express your aliveness. Not to control the outcome, but to share what's real. Sometimes what's real is imperfect. It's messy, it's flawed, and still, it's worth giving. Giving in this way changes how you relate to your limitations. Instead of waiting to outgrow them, you begin including them in the act of generosity. You say, I don't have everything together, but I'm here. I don't know what to say, but I'm listening. I'm struggling, but I still want to help. That honesty is a gift in itself. In Buddhist tradition, the merit of a gift isn't measured by how much is given, it's measured by the heart behind it. A tiny act done with full presence can hold more power than a grand gesture done with ego. This is why dana is considered the first perfection in the paramitasthi, foundational qualities of a bodhisattva. It's not because giving is easy, it's because giving opens the path. Dana teaches you to loosen your grip, to let go not just of objects, but of control, of identity, of the idea that you must be whole before you serve. Every time you offer something, you step into the unknown. You don't know how it will be received. You don't know what will come next. And still, you give. That is a form of awakening. This awakening is not dramatic. It's quiet. It lives in small moments, offering a seat, making a meal, checking in with someone even when you feel exhausted, speaking kindly when you don't have to. These moments matter, not because they fix anything, but because they keep the heart open. Generosity practiced in this way becomes a kind of meditation. It trains the mind to soften, to expand, to remember that connection matters more than self-image. You start noticing how often you want to retreat, how often you feel like withdrawing, not because you're selfish, but because you're afraid to be seen in your humanness. Dana asks you to show up anyway. This doesn't mean abandoning your boundaries. True giving includes self-respect. It knows when to say yes and when to rest. It knows that generosity without integrity becomes self-erasure. But it also knows that waiting to feel fully ready is often just resistance in disguise. Sometimes, the act of giving is what reveals your strength. You don't discover readiness by waiting for it. You discover it by stepping in, trembling and true. That step becomes the teaching, not just for the one receiving but for you. It shows you that generosity isn't about having everything. It's about being present enough to share what you do have. Even when what you have is pain, it can be shared. Not as a burden but as truth. Offering your story, your silence, your confusion can be a form of dana. Because in doing so, you create space for others to be real too. You create room for people to exhale. This kind of giving builds community. Not the kind based on performance or appearance, but the kind based on trust, on presence, on mutual imperfection. You begin to see others not as objects of your generosity, but as mirrors. What you give is part of what you receive. The connection itself is the reward. And when you're on the receiving end, this understanding deepens. You stop feeling shame for accepting help. You stop measuring your worth by how much you give. You begin to see generosity as a shared flow. Sometimes you give, sometimes you receive. Both are sacred. Both require humility. Both teach you how to stay open. Generosity, in this sense, is not about fixing others. It's about letting yourself be moved. Moved by suffering, moved by beauty, moved by the simple truth that life is shared. When you respond from that place, your giving is no longer about identity, it's about love. And love, in Buddhist practice, is not sentimental. It is fierce. Fierce in its willingness to show up. Fierce in its honesty. Fierce in its refusal to wait until conditions are perfect. Love gives because it must, not out of guilt, but out of freedom. That freedom grows with practice. With each act of giving, you let go a little more, of fear, of image, of control. You begin to see that your life, even in its incompleteness, is enough. Enough to offer, enough to share, enough to matter. So let dana be messy. Let it be uncertain. Let it be full of stops and starts. That's not failure. That's the path. A path walked by those who know that imperfection is not an obstacle, it's the doorway. And on the other side of that doorway is connection, not built from perfection, but from presence. And presence is always ready, even when you think you're not. Giving when you're not fully ready teaches you that presence, not perfection, is the offering. You discover how care can be shared, even from a place of uncertainty. But once the heart opens to this kind of generosity, another tension starts to rise that lives not in your feelings, but in your day, time, rhythm, plans that fall apart, routines that never hold the shape you need. You try to live with care and intention, yet the hours twist, the tasks scatter, and peace feels postponed. The practice asks a new kind of surrender now. Can you meet your life even when it doesn't follow your schedule? Zen points directly to this. It doesn't offer strategies to master time. It doesn't demand that every day be smooth. It asks a different question. What happens when your relationship with time is no longer based on control? What happens when the gaps, the breaks, the things you didn't finish or didn't start are allowed to be part of the path? So much of suffering comes not from what happens, but from the belief that it should have happened differently. You planned to wake early, but you didn't. You promised to stay present, but got distracted. You blocked out time to meditate, but the day unraveled. Each moment that diverges from the imagined structure becomes a reason to feel behind. And underneath that pressure lives a quiet story, that consistency equals worth, and routine equals virtue. Zen gently dissolves this belief. It does not glorify rigidity. It honors what's here. A key teaching in Zen is to be intimate with the moment. That includes the moments you didn't plan for, the interruptions, the noise, the forgotten task. the nap that took too long, the start that came too late. If you meet even these with attention, the path continues. If you bring breath into the irregular rhythm, practice remains alive. This means your peace no longer depends on the shape of the day. It depends on how you show up inside it. The mind may say, "I'm off track." But Zen asks, track compared to what? The concept of being behind is built on comparison. You compare today to yesterday, this week to last week, yourself to an ideal that lives only in your head. But awareness doesn't live in comparison. It lives in contact. And contact can happen whether the dishes are done or not. Many people seek spiritual clarity through routines, and its truer discipline can be nourishing. Habits can steady the nervous system, shape intentions, support focus. But when routine becomes a measure of self-worth, it loses its heart. You start serving the structure instead of letting it serve you. You forget that presence doesn't require a perfect rhythm. It just requires your attention. Irregularity is not failure. In fact, it may be the most honest expression of life. Seasons change, bodies shift, energy rises and falls. The breath is not even. The heart doesn't beat like a clock. When you expect your day to run like a machine, you reject the organic nature of existence. You turn yourself into a project instead of a person. Zen asks you to let the project drop. Letting it drop doesn't mean chaos. It means flexibility. It means learning to respond rather than react. When your morning plan breaks down, instead of spiraling into guilt or self-judgment, you pause. You breathe. You ask, what is needed now? Not, what did I fail to do? But, how can I return to presence now? That return is always available, even if the morning is gone, even if the day feels scattered, even if your to-do list stares back at you unfinished. Zen teaches that every moment is a new beginning. Every breath is the doorway back to now. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to catch up. You just have to come back. This shifts your relationship with time itself. Time stops being a threat. It becomes a field, something you move through, not something chasing you. When you stop believing that productivity equals value, your time begins to soften. You begin to trust yourself again, not because you did everything, but because you're still here. And your presence matters more than your pace. This kind of presence requires honesty. It asks you to see where your plans come from. Are you scheduling your life from clarity or from pressure? Are your routines rooted in care or fear of falling behind? Do you rest when your body asks, or only when the calendar permits? These questions don't demand blame. They invite reflection. Reflection opens the door to a different kind of discipline, one that listens, one that adjusts, one that includes the unexpected as part of the design. You begin to build your days around presence, not control, around care, not perfection. You stop punishing yourself for being human. Even in spiritual practice, the need to stay on track can become a trap. You miss a meditation, and shame creeps in. You skip a journal entry, and self-doubt rises. But Zen teaches that every moment holds the full truth of the path. You don't fall behind because the path doesn't run forward. It unfolds where you are, even when you're late, even when you're tired. And in those tired moments, your practice might look different. Maybe your morning meditation becomes 2 breaths in the shower. Maybe your reflection happens in the car, eyes open, mind scattered, but heart still trying. That's not less than, that's real life meeting practice. That's where the path becomes embodied not in ideals, but in what actually happens. Zen values direct experience over concept. It doesn't ask, did you follow your schedule? It asks, were you awake for what happened? That wakefulness may arise in unexpected ways, in delays, in mess, in the quiet realization that you've been rushing all day and forgot to feel your feet. That realization is the path. That noticing is the practice. When you start relating to broken schedules this way, your nervous system can relax. You stop living in fight or flight against your own calendar. You begin to make room for life's unpredictability. You start greeting interruptions not as failures, but as invitations. Not because they're convenient, but because they're honest. Honesty matters more than efficiency. It allows you to stop performing your life and start living it. It makes space for gentleness, for the truth that you're not a robot. That energy is finite. That moods change. That care sometimes takes longer than you expect, and that none of this disqualifies you from being present. Presence doesn't always look organized. Sometimes it looks like pausing in the middle of a mess and feeling your breath. Sometimes it looks like scrapping your plan because your heart needs something different. Sometimes it looks like canceling, slowing down, or saying no. These are not failures. They are practices in themselves. You also begin to relate to others differently. When your own relationship with time softens, so does your judgment of others who run late, change plans, or show up scattered. You start to see that everyone is carrying something. That punctuality doesn't equal goodness. That intention often matters more than execution. You offer others the grace you've started offering yourself. This grace creates space. Space inside your day. Space inside your body. You no longer cram every hour with obligation. You leave room for breathing, for mistakes, for nothing at all. That nothingness is sacred. Zen calls it mu-emptiness. Not absence, but possibility, the place where presence can rise. And from that presence, a new kind of rhythm begins to grow. Not one imposed from outside, but one felt from within. A rhythm that changes with your needs. That adapts to your body, your emotions, your environment. That holds structure without force. That makes room for the unexpected. You start living from that rhythm. You stop measuring success by how closely your day matched your plan. You begin to trust how it unfolded. That trust doesn't make you lazy. It makes you alive. It brings you into contact with the moment you're in, not the one you thought you should be having. Zen practice lives in these small shifts. In how you speak to yourself when the plan falls apart. In how you breathe when the delay comes. In how you return not to the schedule but to the truth. The truth that life is not a checklist, that presence is not a task, that awareness is not bound by time. You are allowed to live irregularly. You are allowed to move slowly. You are allowed to not finish everything. You are allowed to forget and begin again. The path does not close when you miss a step. It waits, quietly, kindly, for your return. And every return is sacred. Every moment of remembering is enough. Because this life, in all its unpredictability, is not something to manage. It is something to meet, fully, imperfectly. Now, when the rhythm breaks and the schedule dissolves, something else becomes visible, something deeper than structure, quieter than intention. In the gaps between plans and outcomes, there's a kind of silence. A space that doesn't demand you to catch up or do more. It simply allows. At first, it might feel like failure, but if you stay, you start to see it differently. This is not emptiness as absence. It is emptiness as openness. And in Buddhism, that openness holds everything, especially what you thought had no place. Emptiness shunyata is one of the most misunderstood teachings in the Dharma. It's not about nihilism or meaninglessness. It's not saying life is hollow or pointless. It's pointing to something else entirely, the insight that everything arises in dependence, without fixed identity, without solid core. Everything you experience, emotions, thoughts, bodies, identities, made of changing conditions. Nothing stands alone. Nothing is unchangeable. Nothing is stuck being only what it appears to be. This is not a rejection of reality. It's a clearer way of seeing it. Because when you believe that things have a fixed essence, you start clinging to them. You cling to your roles, to your ideas about how life should look, to your expectations of yourself and others. And when those expectations are not met, you suffer. Not just because things didn't go as planned, but because you thought they had to. Emptiness dissolves that. When you understand that there's no solid me that needs to be protected, perfected, or defended, the pressure softens. You don't disappear. You're still here, but the false layers fall away. The parts of the self that were tightly held begin to loosen. You're no longer defined by what you achieve or how well you follow a plan. You're no longer trapped in a permanent identity. You become fluid, responsive, open. And in that openness, imperfection is not a threat. It's just part of the appearance, just one of the changing conditions. A mistake is not a crack in who you are. It's a shift in the moment. An emotion is not a flaw in your nature. It's a movement within awareness. Everything becomes workable, no because it's all pleasant, but because it's all held lightly. This lightness does not mean detachment in the cold sense. It means intimacy without clinging. It means being close to life without being caught in it. It means seeing yourself and others not as fixed personalities, but as unfolding experiences. When you truly see emptiness, blame loses its meaning. There's no permanent self to insult. There's no failure that can define you. What happens, happens. And from that place, you respond instead of react. That response is not passive. It can be deeply engaged, but it's flexible. It doesn't carry the weight of proving who you are. It doesn't need to perfect everything to feel okay. It recognizes that whatever is arising, joy, fear, chaos, peace is part of the dance. Not a problem to fix, but a wave to meet. Emptiness also allows space for others to be fully human. When you stop expecting yourself to be consistent and flawless, you stop demanding that from people around you. You no longer freeze others in old roles. You stop needing them to always behave a certain way to match your comfort. You begin to see that they too are not solid. They are in motion. They are doing what they can, shaped by conditions you may never fully understand. That kind of seeing is compassionate. It doesn't mean you excuse harm. It doesn't mean you ignore truth. But you stop personalizing every disappointment. You stop making everything about you. You begin to breathe around conflict because you see it for what it is: temporary, conditioned, empty of inherent identity. This view doesn't make pain disappear, but it removes the extra layers, the interpretations, the judgments, the stories that make pain heavier than it needs to be. When sadness arises, you let it. You don't have to label yourself as broken. When anger flares, you don't collapse into guilt. You feel it move, without gripping it or pushing it away. The experience doesn't stick to a fixed self, because that self is no longer your reference point. Without a reference point, you begin to trust the moment more than the mind's version of it. You stop needing things to go a certain way. You start meeting what's here, fully, gently, with room to change. And this is where the teaching becomes most alive, because when there's room, everything can shift. Even the parts of you that seem stuck forever. You may have lived with a story of being too emotional, too scattered, too anxious. You may have built your identity around what you think is wrong with you. But those traits are not your essence. They are not solid. They are not permanent. When seen through emptiness, they become workable. They become just another set of movements within experience. And in that seeing, freedom begins. Freedom doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop identifying with every feeling. You stop assuming that what you feel is proof of who you are. You can be angry without being an angry person. You can be sad without being a failure. You can miss the mark without becoming the mistake. This kind of inner spaciousness is healing, not because it erases pain, but because it no longer traps you in it. You begin to act with more ease. You begin to make choices not from fear, but from connection. You start letting go of the need to define yourself with precision. You stop needing to be good enough all the time. You start living, Living from emptiness is not empty, it's full of possibility. When you're no longer bound by rigid ideas of who you must be, you have room to grow, to change, to meet each day without dragging all your old identities into it. You become curious. You begin to relate to yourself as a process, not a product, a living question, not a fixed answer. This view changes your relationship to time. You stop trying to outrun the past. You stop fearing the future. You begin meeting each moment as it comes, with the understanding that it too is not fixed. What's painful now may ease. What feels stuck now may shift. You don't need to force it. You just need to stay present with it. That presence creates the conditions for movement. Movement arises naturally when there is space. That's what emptiness offers. It's not a void. It's a release from tightness, from pressure, from having to get it right all the time. It welcomes your flaws because it doesn't see them as wrong. It sees them as part of the unfolding. It gives them room to breathe. And in that breathing, something softens. That softness makes transformation possible, not because you finally fixed yourself, but because you stopped holding so tightly. You stopped clutching your identity. You stopped resisting what wanted to move. The practice became less about improvement and more about allowing. And through allowing, things began to shift. Even relationships benefit from this. When you stop needing others to validate your worth, you can love more freely. You don't perform. You don't cling. You don't fear their imperfections because you're no longer terrified of your own. You can be honest. You can listen. You can forgive more easily, not because you forget, but because you understand. Understanding deepens as you practice. Emptiness is not a theory to memorize. It's a way of being that grows with time. At first, it may sound abstract, but slowly, through daily life, it becomes tangible. You notice it when you stop reacting so quickly, when you stop needing to win an argument, when you notice a thought and let it pass, when you feel pain but don't collapse into it. Each of these moments reveals the freedom that comes from non-grasping. And this non-grasping isn't passive. It's awake, it's grounded, it knows when to act, when to rest, when to speak, when to listen. It knows that because it's not trapped in identity. It's not clouded by the fear of being wrong. It responds instead of defends. It adapts instead of controls. Adaptability is a mark of freedom. When you no longer need to preserve an image of perfection, you can meet what arises without fear of losing yourself. Because you're no longer holding on to a fixed self. You're letting go. And in that letting go, you find yourself not in a new image, but in the space that holds all images. That space is not something far away. It's right here, between the breath and the thought, between the action and the impulse. In the pause before the story begins. That's where emptiness lives, not as nothing, but as openness, as the ground that lets everything come and go without getting stuck. When you trust that ground, you no longer need to be perfect. You no longer need to prove your worth. You simply show up. You stay present. You move with what's true. And that movement becomes your practice. A practice that doesn't fear flaws. A life that doesn't require fixing. A presence that doesn't demand performance. Just breath, just awareness, just now. And in that now, everything belongs. When you no longer hold yourself together with perfection, something essential becomes clear. Presence is not built in flawless conditions. It arises from how you meet reality exactly as it is. And this is never more obvious than when you sit down to meditate. You want peace, but the mind resists. You want stillness, but thoughts multiply. You want focus, but instead you're replaying conversations, making plans, or wondering if you're doing it wrong. This isn't a failure. It's the very heart of the path. Distracted meditation is not a sign you're unfit for practice. It is the practice. Because what you meet on the cushion is not a clean slate, it's the same messy, layered, restless mind you carry into every moment of your life. Meditation does not create distraction, it reveals it. It shows you with honesty and precision how attention behaves when you stop trying to control everything. That honesty is uncomfortable. You may sit down expecting quiet and find noise. You may want insight and meet resistance. The breath disappears. The posture feels heavy. The thoughts spiral. But here's the truth. None of this is in the way. This is the way. Every time you notice distraction, you're waking up. Every time you remember the breath after forgetting, the path continues. The value of meditation is not found in constant concentration, it's found in the returning. The return is the heartbeat of practice, that gentle redirection, that moment of, oh, I've wandered, without judgment, without shame, just a breath, and back. You do this not once, but again and again. Sometimes it feels like you're starting over every few seconds. That's not failure, that's repetition. And repetition is how the mind learns to soften. This repetition trains a new kind of awareness that stays close to experience without forcing it to change. You stop waiting for the perfect session. You start meeting the session you're actually in. And in doing so, you meet yourself. Not the version you wish you were, but the version that's here, thinking and breathing and trying. Trying is sacred, even when it's clumsy, even when it's full of doubt. Meditation is not about perfect stillness, it's about honest attention, and honest attention often includes noise. It includes the mental chatter, the emotional tension, the body's fidgeting, the pull to check the time. These aren't barriers. They are invitations to see how the mind works when you stop distracting it from itself. This seeing is what builds wisdom, because once you recognize how thoughts arise, how they pull you in, how quickly you believe them, you begin to loosen your grip, not by force, but by familiarity. Thoughts stop being commands. They become experiences. They arise, stay for a bit, and pass. The same with feelings. The same with cravings. You start to see their shape, and you realize you don't have to follow everyone. But that recognition comes only through practice, and not just the peaceful kind, the distracted kind, the impatient kind, the sessions where everything feels off. These are the ones that build resilience. They teach you how to stay, not because staying feels good, but because staying reveals something deeper than comfort presence. Presence doesn't mean perfect focus. It means being real. It means including what's happening without turning away. So, if your mind is noisy, be with that. If your body is restless, notice it. If your emotions are raw, feel them. Not to fix, but to witness. To let the mess exist without making it wrong. This witnessing changes your nervous system. Slowly, over time, it teaches your body that it can remain safe in the face of discomfort, that it doesn't have to escape every unpleasant sensation. That awareness can hold more than you thought. The practice becomes a container not to shut things out, but to hold everything in. That holding creates space, not the space of silence, but the space of non-reactivity, the space where you feel a thought arise but don't chase it, where you notice an itch but wait a moment before scratching, where you experience anxiety and still choose to stay. This space is not dramatic, but it's powerful. It's where freedom starts to form. Freedom from needing to feel calm in order to meditate. Freedom from the pressure to perform your practice. Freedom from judging every session as good or bad. You begin to see that even the scattered sits are part of the path, even the ones where you lose the breath over and over again, even the ones where you want to quit 5 minutes in, because those are the sits that teach humility. They show you the mind as it is, not as you want it to be. And seeing the mind clearly is the first step in understanding it. You stop trying to force discipline and start cultivating compassion. You meet your thoughts like visitors instead of enemies. You stop fighting distraction and begin learning from it. Each form of distraction carries its own wisdom. Restlessness might show you where energy is stuck. Daydreaming may reveal where your longings live. Resistance might point to the fear of feeling something real. These aren't problems to fix, they're maps. They show you where attention goes when you stop controlling it. And once you know that, you can begin to train it. Training doesn't mean suppression. It means shaping the conditions gently over time. You choose to sit. You choose to return. You choose to stay a little longer, even when it's hard. These small choices accumulate. They create a new habit, not of controlling your mind, but of being with it, of meeting it again and again, no matter what it's doing. Over time, you begin to notice patterns, how the same thoughts visit every day, how certain postures stir certain emotions, how your mind tightens in specific ways. This familiarity deepens your relationship with yourself. You start to sense the texture of your mental habits, and that sensitivity allows you to respond with care. You may even begin to find ease in the middle of the mess, not because it's gone, but because you've stopped resisting it. The sound outside no longer pulls you out of practice, it becomes part of the practice. The tension in your shoulders no longer feels like a problem, it becomes an object of awareness. The judgment in your mind no longer defines you, it becomes another passing wave. This integration is what makes meditation real. It's not about escaping life, it's about entering it more fully. The cushion is not a place to perfect yourself. It's a place to be with yourself, without editing, without performance, without needing the moment to be different. That kind of presence begins to move off the cushion. You notice when your mind wanders during a conversation. You catch yourself reacting and pause instead. You feel your breath before answering a difficult question. These moments are the fruit of sitting in the mess. They don't come from smooth, perfect sessions. They come from the practice of coming back, over and over again. Coming back is everything. It doesn't matter how many times you drift. What matters is the choice to return. Every return is a victory. Every return is a moment of clarity. Every return is a reminder. You are not your distraction. You are the awareness noticing it. And that awareness is always here, waiting for your attention. There's no need to wait for the perfect moment to practice, the perfect mood, the perfect environment. Practice begins wherever you are, in whatever state you're in. It meets you in your exhaustion, your restlessness, your overwhelm. And it teaches you to sit down anyway, to breathe anyway, to return anyway. Because the mess is not the problem, it's the path. And mindfulness is not a state you achieve, it's the act of remembering what's already true, that you can be present in the middle of your life, not just in the quiet parts, but in the noise, in the discomfort, in the distraction. That's where real meditation lives, not in silence, but in staying, not in stillness, but in return. And in that return, again and again, the practice becomes yours, not as an escape, but as a way to live. Sitting with the mess reveals something quietly profound. You were never the only one struggling to stay present. Everyone's mind wanders. Everyone forgets. Everyone returns. But often, that truth is hidden behind silence, behind effort, behind the unspoken wish to seem composed, collected, focused. The deeper realization isn't just that your practice includes distraction, it's that so does theirs. And once this truth is seen clearly, something larger comes into view. The spiritual path is not walked alone, and it is not always walked in sync. Community Sangha is one of the three jewels of Buddhism. It's held up as essential, as sacred, as support for the path. But what's often left unsaid is how complex that support can be. The Sangha, like the self, is never perfect. It's made of people who have fears, projections, misunderstandings. people who want to be seen, but don't always know how to reveal themselves. People who are healing, but not healed. And in that, community becomes both a place of refuge and a place of friction. There's an expectation sometimes that spiritual communities should be models of harmony, that everyone should communicate clearly, hold space effortlessly, resolve tension with compassion. When that doesn't happen, it can feel disillusioning. You might think, I thought this space was different. But expecting perfection from community creates the same suffering as expecting it from yourself. It replaces connection with performance. It replaces honesty with pressure. Real community isn't built by avoiding conflict. It's built by how you move through it. It's built by truth-telling, by being seen in your confusion, your insecurity, your grief. It's built when someone says, I don't know how to hold this, and no one turns away. That kind of space can't be created through rules or rituals alone. It's shaped through shared courage, the courage to let others see the cracks. Cracks in a sangha aren't signs of failure. They're signs of reality, signs that people are showing up as they are, and those cracks can become openings, places where deeper trust is formed. But only if the group is willing to stay with what's real, not just what's pleasant. This staying is hard. It means sitting in discomfort together, naming tension without assigning blame, listening without rushing to fix. It means letting go of the idea that agreement is always possible or necessary. Sometimes the most powerful act is not solving, but witnessing, holding space without needing resolution, letting silence be part of the conversation. In many sanghas, silence is used well during meditation, but when it comes to interpersonal friction, silence can also become a shield, a way to avoid discomfort, a way to keep things looking peaceful on the surface while pain simmers underneath. But peace without honesty isn't peace, it's pressure. It disconnects rather than binds. To create real connection, someone has to go first. Someone has to speak the thing no one wants to say. To name the feeling others are also carrying. To say, I feel left out, or I feel unseen, or that moment hurt. Not to accuse, not to attack, but to reveal. Vulnerability becomes the doorway. When it's walked through with care, it invites others to meet you there. And when that invitation is accepted, something shifts. People stop holding their breath. They stop pretending. They start relating from the ground instead of the mask. And that ground, however, Shakis, where true sangha is built. Not through shared perfection, but through mutual imperfection. This kind of connection does not require agreement. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to stay open even when emotions run high. It requires the humility to say, I might be wrong, but this is what I feel. And the generosity to say, you don't need to be perfect for me to care about you. The teachings support this. The Buddha said the Sangha should be a field of merit, not because everyone behaves ideally, but because the intention is rooted in truth. Even monastics had conflict. Even long-time practitioners struggled with pride, jealousy, doubt. But what made the community strong was not the absence of these things. It was the ability to stay in relationship with them. Relationship means recognizing that every person brings their own history into the room, their own conditioning, their own triggers. What looks like overreaction may be an old wound. What sounds like detachment may be self-protection. When these things are left unspoken, the community stays shallow. When they're named with compassion, it deepens. Depth in Sangha doesn't mean constant emotional processing. It means creating a space where truth is not feared, where silence is not used to suppress, but to support, where listening isn't just polite, but sincere, where no one is trying to be the most awakened person in the room. When people stop trying to perform insight, vulnerability becomes safer, the competition fades, the mask of constant composure softens, people begin to speak in real voices. They laugh without needing it to be mindful. They cry without apologizing. They support one another, not because it looks good, but because they care. Care is what keeps Sangha alive. Not structure, not agreement, not uniformity, just care. And care is messy. It means holding someone in their uncertainty. It means making room for tension without trying to erase it. It means letting the community evolve, not into something smoother, but into something more real. And sometimes, real includes rupture. Sometimes people leave. Sometimes the bond breaks. Sometimes someone says something that can't be easily taken back. These moments hurt. They challenge your ideas of spiritual space, but they are part of the path. Not because the pain is ideal, but because healing it requires honesty, humility, and love. Forgiveness becomes part of the practice, not just for others, but for yourself. You forgive yourself for missing the mark, for speaking out of turn, for needing more than you thought you should. You forgive others for not reading your mind, for not being more skillful, for carrying their own weight. Forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility, it rehumanizes it. Humanness is what makes community sacred. Not wisdom alone, not experience, but the willingness to sit in a room together and say, "This is who I am, and I'm still learning." That humility opens hearts. It invites trust. It tells people they don't have to be anywhere but here. Here, with the crack in the circle. Here, with the unresolved question. Here, with the tension that hasn't softened yet. Because here is enough if it's met with honesty, if it's held with care. If the people in the room are willing to look at one another and say, "Let's keep trying." Trying is the real glue. It's not the vows or the teachings or the structure. It's the effort to return, to apologize, to listen again, to make space when it's hard, to say thank you, to stay connected even when it feels easier to pull away. Sangha, like practice, is not clean. It's not always quiet. But it is powerful. It is healing. It teaches you that your path is not yours alone. It's walked with others, in fits and starts, in harmony and in conflict. And every moment you choose presence over avoidance, truth over performance, care over image, that path becomes more real. And real is enough. More than enough. Because in real, there is room for everyone. Real community is built not from polished truths, but from the willingness to stay open even when things feel unresolved. That same willingness lives in the teachings themselves. Not all Buddhist texts are complete. Not every sutra arrives with a neat conclusion or clear instruction. Some are fragmented. Some are apocryphal. Some end mid-thought. And rather than being flaws, these gaps carry their own wisdom. They show us that truth is not always something to finish. Sometimes it's something to live into. The idea that wisdom must be polished is a habit of the modern mind. We look for systems that are tidy, teachings that are definitive, answers that explain everything. But the Dharma never promised to be that. The Dharma promised to point. And many of its most powerful teachings do not wrap things up. They leave space. They invite reflection. They trust your experience to complete the sentence. In Buddhist history, some texts were lost, others altered, others deliberately left incomplete. There are sutras that begin but never end, dialogues that fade mid-conversation, teachings that leave key terms undefined. Some of these texts were passed down through oral tradition and evolved as they moved. Others were discovered in pieces, preserved by time and sand, rediscovered centuries later with missing lines and open meanings. And yet, they're still studied, still respected, still included in the path. Why? Because what matters is not the finish. What matters is the invitation. An unfinished sutra doesn't ask you to memorize it. It asks you to keep listening, to explore the silence after the last word, to see that your life is part of the continuation. That truth is not static, it's unfolding. This unfolding mirrors your own practice. Your insight doesn't arrive all at once. Your growth doesn't follow a clean arc. There are gaps, there are pauses, there are chapters that don't yet make sense. And that doesn't make your path broken. It makes it alive. Just like the sutras, you are not finished, and you don't need to be. Many of the earliest Mahayana texts were written to challenge fixed interpretations. They weren't just teachings, they were questions. They took earlier forms of the Dharma and opened them wider. They introduced paradox, poetic language, contradiction. The Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and then stops short of defining what that actually means. It doesn't explain the mystery, it hands it to you. That handing is an act of trust. It trusts your capacity to sit with the incomplete, to feel your way through meaning rather than rush to grasp it. That's a different kind of learning. It's not about collecting knowledge, it's about transforming perception. And transformation doesn't happen in the mind alone. It happens through experience, over time, often through confusion. Confusion is not a problem in this tradition. It's a stage, a place where certainty dissolves and new insight can arise. An unfinished teaching lets you stay in that space. It doesn't rush to resolve. It doesn't smooth out the tension. It lets you wrestle, reflect, explore, and in doing so, it meets you where you are not, where you're supposed to be. That's why some teachers deliberately speak in riddles, why koans are left unanswered, why some texts contradict themselves on purpose. Because the goal is not to hand you a perfect system. The goal is to shake loose your attachment to fixed views, to help you see that even the teachings themselves are not ultimate truths. They are skillful Minsu Paya pointers towards something you must taste directly. Even the Buddha said this. He described his teachings as a raft, meant to help you cross the river, not to be carried forever. If the raft itself becomes a burden, it no longer serves. The same applies to the sutras. They are tools, not trophies, not prisons of philosophy, just words pointing beyond themselves. And sometimes words stop. That stopping is not a failure, it's a doorway. The gaps in a text are the places where your own awareness is invited to enter. You're asked not just to listen, but to participate, to complete the thought with your living, to carry the teaching into the parts of your life where words don't reach. This participation is what makes the Dharma a living path. It's not preserved in stone, it's not fixed in time. It evolves, it adapts, it finds voice in new languages, new cultures, new forms. It welcomes reinterpretation, and each reinterpretation brings something fresh, not because the old teachings were wrong, but because truth keeps expressing itself through new conditions. So when you read a sutra and feel confused, that confusion is part of the path. When you encounter a gap in the teaching and feel disoriented, that disorientation is the beginning of insight. It's a reminder that the Dharma is not about answers, it's about awareness. And awareness does not demand that everything be complete. It doesn't need closure to be steady. It can rest in openness. It can stay present in the middle of a sentence. It can hold silence without rushing to fill it. This is where the perfection of the incomplete becomes clear. The teachings that leave room are the ones that stay alive in you. They ask questions long after the page is turned. They echo in your daily choices. They grow as you grow. They do not age, because they are not locked in form. When a text ends abruptly or leaves a phrase unexplained, it mirrors your own inner work. Your story too is unfinished. Your healing, your understanding, your letting go, all moves in spirals, not straight lines. The incomplete sutra teaches you to stay with that process, to not rush it, to not force clarity where there is none yet. It also teaches humility. You stop expecting to master the teachings. You start realizing that the teachings are mastering you through repetition, through doubt, through continued return. You start to feel reverence not for perfect knowledge, but for the willingness to keep looking, to keep learning, to let the teachings change shape as your life changes shape. This kind of humility also changes how you relate to others. You stop needing people to speak clearly all the time. You stop demanding resolution from every conversation. You allow pauses. You hold space for contradiction. You stop needing to explain everything. You let silence be part of relationship, part of intimacy, part of trust. Trust grows in the space between answers. When someone says, "I don't know," and you stay with them anyway. When a question lingers, and you don't rush to solve it. When you let others be a work in progress, just like the texts, just like you. And this shared imperfection creates deeper belonging, because it removes the pressure to perform insight. It invites everyone to bring their unfinished questions, their half-formed thoughts, their uncertain steps. And that kind of community is powerful. It's real. It's grounded in practice, not pretense. The unfinished sutra becomes a metaphor for how we hold all things: our lives, our work, our healing, our love. We stop asking for finality. We start allowing mystery. We learn to carry the question with care, to live inside the unfolding, to let truth arrive in its own time. And in this arrival, the heart softens. It doesn't need to be right. It doesn't need to know. It just needs to be here, awake, willing to read a sentence that doesn't end and stay with what follows, willing to receive a teaching without holding it too tightly, willing to live a life that is not tidy but true, because the truth doesn't always come in full paragraphs. Sometimes it lives in the spaces between. When we learn to live inside the incomplete, we stop asking everything to resolve. We begin to trust that meaning doesn't always need to be packaged, that some truths grow in silence. But the path doesn't only ask us to stay with what's unfinished, it also asks us to turn toward what we've been taught to reject. The parts of life that feel too much, too strange, too uncomfortable. In Vajrayana Buddhism, these are not obstacles. They are gateways. They are the material of transformation. And the practice is not to avoid them, but to go directly in. Vajrayana, the tantric path of Buddhism, does not separate the sacred from the profane. It looks directly at what others fear and says, this too is part of awakening. While many traditions emphasize purity and renunciation, Vajrayana holds a different view. It teaches that enlightenment does not lie on the other side of difficulty, but right in the middle of it. That the path to liberation goes through, not around, the very things we usually try to avoid. This includes what is painful, what is shameful, what is taboo, desire, rage, lust, death, fear. These are not seen as dirty in themselves. They are seen as powerful energies that, if met with awareness and trained insight, can be transformed into fuel for the path. The teachings don't glorify indulgence. They don't suggest you act on every impulse. But they ask you not to deny what's there. They ask you to work with it consciously. One of the central insights of the tantric view is that everything has Buddha nature. Not just peaceful emotions, but turbulent ones. Not just wisdom texts, but the body. Not just monasteries, but cemeteries. The places most people avoid these become sacred grounds for tantric practice. In ancient India, some of the most advanced practitioners meditated in charnel grounds, surrounded by death and decay, precisely because these environments stripped away pretense. There was no way to pretend life was tidy there, and so it became the perfect place to face truth without illusion. This approach might seem extreme, but it's rooted in a deep understanding of how the mind works. Avoidance strengthens fear. Suppression buries energy without dissolving it. But direct awareness, fierce, honest, unflinching, can digest even the darkest experience. In Vajrayana, transformation is not done by escaping impurity. It's done by realizing there is no fixed impurity in the first place. What we call impure is often just misunderstood, or feared, or hidden. But when we bring it into the light of practice, it reveals its nature. Anger becomes clarity. Desire becomes connection. grief becomes tenderness, not because these feelings are changed from the outside, but because their deeper qualities are revealed when we meet them without judgment. Tantric methods often use symbols and imagery that challenge conventional ideas: wrathful deities, skeleton dances, offerings of substances that would be considered inappropriate in other traditions. These are not decorative, they are psychological mirrors. They are tools meant to shake the practitioner out of the dualism between pure and impure, holy and profane, worthy and unworthy. They teach the mind to stay steady in the face of what once felt unbearable. This steadiness is not passive, it's born from training. A tantric practitioner does not simply embrace discomfort without preparation. They are guided by a qualified teacher. They build strong foundations in ethics, compassion, and concentration. Only with this base does the deeper work begin the turning toward what others avoid, and the recognition that even this, too, can be a gate to wisdom. One of the most radical aspects of this path is its rejection of spiritual bypassing. You are not asked to float above your shadow, but to sit with it, to look directly into the eyes of your confusion and not turn away. This creates a different kind of awakening, one that is not based on escaping suffering, but on transforming it from the inside out. This transformation is not about fixing. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about recognizing that what you thought disqualified you is actually part of your path. That the anger you feel, the urges you hide, the fears you've never spoken, they're not signs you're failing. They're materials for the work. This path also opens space for parts of identity that are often marginalized. Gender, sexuality, body difference, all of these, in a tantric view, are not distractions from the path. They are the path. The very energies you've been told to quiet might be the ones most alive with potential for awakening. You don't have to fit a mold to be worthy of practice. You don't have to hide your complexity. The complexity becomes the doorway. But this path is not about indulgence. It's about intention. The practitioner learns to hold power, not chase it, to witness difficult feelings without being consumed, to engage the world without getting lost in it. Tantric training refines this capacity through mantra, visualization, breath control, and deep meditative absorption. These are not mystical accessories. They are precise psychological tools designed to harness energy and return it to awareness. Awareness is the thread that weaves it all together. Without awareness, the confrontation with the taboo can become chaos. With awareness, it becomes liberation. You learn to see the root of every impulse, the story behind every aversion, the energy beneath every desire. And in seeing it, you're no longer ruled by it. The power of this path is not in its symbolism, it's in its honesty. It teaches that real awakening must include everything, not just the parts that feel spiritual. It must include your entire life, your confusion, your hunger, your mistakes. It doesn't ask you to be clean, it asks you to be present. Presence reveals that the division between sacred and profane is artificial. When you meet each moment with full attention, everything becomes part of the practice. Eating, arguing, crying, laughing, sex, silence. There is no moment outside the path, no experience too dark, no emotion too wild. This has profound implications for how you relate to your own healing. You stop waiting to be ready. You stop needing to be above it. You bring the pain in. You welcome the fear. You offer it to the practice. And slowly, the shame begins to dissolve, not because you finally became perfect, but because you stopped believing you had to. The tantric path is not for everyone. It requires maturity, grounding, and deep ethical clarity. But its central teaching is universal. Nothing is wasted. Not your wounds, not your confusion, not your longing. Everything you are can be transformed into the fuel for awakening if you're willing to meet it with truth. That truth includes discomfort. It includes mess. but it also includes immense beauty, a beauty that doesn't depend on purity, a beauty that rises from the willingness to see clearly, to feel fully, to live honestly. In a world that teaches you to hide what hurts, this path asks you to look again, to look deeper, to ask what's really there beneath the label, beneath the story, beneath the fear. What you find might shake you, but it might also free you, because when you walk straight into what you once avoided, you stop being afraid of yourself. And when that fear dissolves, there's room to see what was there all along. Not just shadow, but sacred fire. Facing what you were taught to avoid doesn't just bring clarity, it brings a new kind of softness. You start to see that transformation isn't about polishing every flaw, it's about staying close to what's real, even when it's rough. But there's still a quiet pressure that often remains. The idea that you need to figure it all out in this one lifetime, that you have to heal everything now, that this version of you is your only chance to get it right. That pressure can feel like urgency. It can sound like failure. But Buddhist wisdom offers something far more spacious. The teachings on rebirth are not there to frighten, they're there to open time, to show you that your life is not a one-time test with a pass or fail outcome. It's part of something ongoing, a flow of causes and effects, shaped by intention and action, but never frozen in place. The point is not to be perfect now. The point is to live in a way that plants good seeds without needing to see the harvest today. In this view, what you're working with right now, your patterns, your fears, your habits, is not a sign of what's wrong with you. It's part of the natural unfolding of karma. Karma here doesn't mean punishment. It means momentum. It means energy shaped by previous choices, carried forward, always in motion. Your present state is not a verdict. It's a condition. And conditions can be changed not all at once, but gradually, through awareness, patience, and effort. That change is never wasted, even if it feels slow, even if no one else sees it, even if you don't fully feel its effects yet. In this life, you may begin something you don't finish. You may try to shift a deep pattern, only to fall back into it. You may start to open your heart, only to find it closing again. But none of that is failure. It's the real rhythm of growth. And the teachings remind you, even unfinished effort continues. Just as the body leaves traces, so does the mind. What you practice becomes part of you, not just now, but in the future. The kindness you show, the honesty you choose, the courage you build, none of it disappears. It shapes the stream of your being. It influences how future moments will unfold, whether in this life or beyond. That's why practice matters, not because it fixes everything instantly, but because it moves the momentum in a wiser direction. When you look at life through this lens, urgency dissolves. You stop treating your growth as a crisis. You stop measuring your worth by how much you've accomplished by a certain age. You begin to trust slow change. You begin to forgive incompletion. You begin to see that everything done with sincerity has value, even if it's not tidy. This view also brings relief. It reminds you that being human includes struggle, that there's no spiritual timeline you're falling behind on, that others are also moving through their own cycles, some fast, some slow, some visible, some hidden. Comparison begins to fall away. You stop asking, "Why am I not further along?" and start asking, "What can I tend to right now?" Right now is all that matters, not because it's all you'll ever have, but because it's the only place where anything can be done. The past can't be erased. The future can't be controlled. But this moment can be met with care. That care plants seeds. Some will grow quickly. Others will take years, maybe longer, but they grow. Rebirth is not only a teaching about lifetimes, it's also a metaphor for how change works inside you. Every moment you bring attention to something painful and meet it with compassion, that's a kind of rebirth. Every time you choose to pause instead of react, that's a new beginning. Every time you see something clearly that used to be automatic, the old self dissolves and something new appears. These small deaths and renewals happen all the time. You don't need to wait for another life to experience them. That means you don't need to panic when old patterns show up. You don't need to interpret difficulty as regression. You're not meant to move in a straight line. Some growth looks like stillness. Some clarity looks like confusion. What matters is not what it looks like. What matters is how you relate to it. Relating wisely means letting go of the idea that success is about completion. It means learning to walk even when you can't see the finish. It means trusting that the effort itself is enough. That showing up again and again, even with doubt, is an offering to the path, and offerings are never wasted. This perspective also helps soften your view of others. When you stop needing to be complete, you stop expecting others to be. You let people be in process. You let them have their patterns, their delays, their confusion. You don't excuse harm, but you stop needing everyone to meet your timeline. You start seeing others not as fixed identities, but as streams flowing through conditions, influenced by karma, always changing. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you humble. It reminds you that transformation takes time, and time itself is not linear. Someone may look stuck on the outside, but be undergoing deep internal change. Someone may seem peaceful, but be in the middle of something they haven't yet found language for. You begin to approach others with more gentleness, more patience, more space. Space is the fruit of this teaching. The space to be human, the space to grow slowly, the space to begin again, even after years of delay. This space invites you to breathe differently, to stop rushing to become someone else, to settle into the person you are, with the understanding that your becoming doesn't end here. In this spaciousness, forgiveness becomes easier, not just for others, but for yourself. You let yourself off the hook for not having it all together. You start to believe that you are allowed to be learning, that you're allowed to be unfinished, that even your struggle carries meaning not as punishment, but as part of the path. The path unfolds according to causes and conditions. You can't control all of them, but you can influence the present. That influence matters more than any outcome. When you speak with kindness even though it's hard, when you meditate even though your mind is restless, when you choose truth over comfort, those are real shifts. They ripple outward, they leave traces. And those traces remain. They don't need to be recognized. They don't need to be praised. They are part of the inner work that keeps going, that moves through lifetimes. When you live with that understanding, you stop grasping for finality. You begin to live from intention instead of anxiety. Intention means aligning with your deepest values. It means doing the next right thing, even when no one is watching. It means trusting that every moment of clarity, of care, of courage adds to the direction of your life. Not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you honest. Honesty becomes your compass. You stop pretending you're further along than you are. You stop hiding your confusion. You start owning your questions. And from that honesty, something deeper grows, trust in the unfolding, even when it's slow. Slow isn't bad. In many cases, it's the only way real transformation happens. Fast change can be exciting, but it's often unstable. The kind of growth that endures is the kind that comes from consistent effort, from staying with discomfort, from letting go of urgency. Urgency often masks fear. Fear that you'll run out of time, fear that you'll never get it right. But if rebirth is real, there is time. Not infinite time to waste, but enough time to keep going, enough time to learn, enough time to return to the path, no matter how far you've wandered. This doesn't mean you should delay your practice. It means you can relax into it. You can stop performing. You can stop panicking. You can start to trust the process that includes mistakes, that includes doubt, that includes long seasons where nothing seems to move. Even those seasons are part of it. Seeds germinate in the dark. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to grow. And growth isn't always visible. Sometimes it happens underground, in the quiet work of healing, forgiving, remembering. Sometimes it's only visible later, when the conditions ripen, but it's still happening. So let your practice be rooted in patience. Let your choices be guided by care. Let your life be a work in progress, not a test. The goal is not to complete the journey all at once. The goal is to stay on it, with honesty, with intention, with the understanding that everything counts. Everything counts. Even this moment, even your pause, even your forgetting, especially your return. Letting go of urgency softens something deep inside. You begin to feel that you don't need to arrive anywhere all at once, that each step you take with care and honesty is enough. But even when you begin to trust your own timing, one voice often lingers, the one that measures, the one that compares, the one that tells you how far you should be. This voice is not loud to others, but it echoes through your mind. It follows your efforts, judges your pauses, doubts your progress. This is the inner critic, and it doesn't leave through willpower. It softens through kindness. In Buddhist practice, kindness is not a feeling, it's a discipline. Metta-loving kindness is not reserved for others. It is extended toward the places in you that are hardest to love. And often, the hardest place is the voice inside that is trying to protect you by being unkind. The perfectionist within, the one that never rests, that measures your worth in results. That speaks in should and not enough and why haven't you? This voice believes it is helping, but it doesn't understand the harm it causes. Applying metta to this voice does not mean agreeing with it. It means seeing it clearly, understanding where it came from, meeting it with patience, not resistance. The inner critic is often formed early. It's shaped by experiences of shame, of pressure, of not feeling safe to simply be. It mimics voices you once heard or absorbed. It becomes your own, not because you chose it, but because it felt familiar, and then it grows. It becomes a pattern so close to you that you stop questioning it. But the Dharma teaches that patterns are not permanent. They are conditioned. They arise based on causes, and they can change through different conditions. Metta is one of those conditions. When practiced with honesty, it can interrupt even the deepest inner habits. Not by arguing with them, but by meeting them with a different energy that says, you don't have to earn your worth. You are already enough to care for. This shift begins when you start noticing the voice, not as a truth teller, but as a habit. When it arises, you pause, you name it. You say, here you are again. You don't fight it, you also don't believe it. You hold it like you'd hold a frightened child, because often that's what it is. A part of you that learned fear early and thought that harshness was the way to survive. This does not mean you become passive. Kindness is not weakness, it's strength in another form. It's the strength to stay present with your pain without making it worse. It's the strength to speak to yourself as you would to someone you love. To replace the inner commentary of criticism with phrases that are gentle, steady, real. You don't have to fake sweetness. You don't have to cover pain with positive thinking. Metta isn't about pretending. It's about truthfulness. It's about saying, this is hard, and I choose to meet it with care. This is painful, and I choose to stay soft. This voice is hurting me, and I will not turn against myself in response. Sometimes the practice is as simple as breathing and saying quietly, may I be kind to myself in this moment, or may I meet this pain with gentleness, or even, may I forgive myself for believing I had to be perfect. These are not magical words. They are reminders. They are seeds. And like any seed, they take time to grow. The inner critic will not disappear overnight. But it will change. It becomes less convincing, less sharp, less constant. It begins to lose its grip when you stop feeding it with agreement. When you stop answering it with shame, when you meet it with the quiet firmness of metta, something begins to shift. You stop being the one who judges yourself and become the one who cares for the one who is judged. This shift creates space. Space to rest. Space to not do everything perfectly. Space to be human, not as a flaw, but as your ground of practice. You begin to trust that your value does not come from performance, that your worth is not something you achieve, but something you recognize, again and again, in the way you return to the breath, in the way you meet yourself after forgetting. And when you forget, as you will, the practice is to begin again, not with punishment, but with care. The critic will say, "You've failed." Metta will say, "This is the moment to begin again." You choose which voice to strengthen, and each time you choose kindness, even when it's hard, even when it feels unnatural, you change the structure of your inner life. Neuroscience supports this. The brain changes through repetition. Habits of thought form grooves. But new grooves can be made. They don't require force. They require consistency. Each time you pause the critic and bring in kindness, you form a new connection. Over time, the new path becomes clearer. The old voice becomes background, still present, but no longer in control. This also changes how you relate to others. When your inner voice softens, your outer voice does too. You stop demanding perfection in others because you no longer require it from yourself. You become more forgiving, more present, more able to see others as works in progress, just like you. And this softens community. It builds trust. It invites deeper connection. Metta is not always comfortable. It brings you face to face with the ways you've hurt yourself, with the things you've believed, with the things you've said to yourself in secret. But that discomfort is part of the healing. It's the beginning of liberation, not from imperfection, but from the illusion that you need to be anything other than what you are to be worthy of care. The practice of metta begins with intention. You don't have to feel loving to begin. You only have to want to turn toward love. Even a small shift in tone, breath of gentleness can start the process. You sit, you breathe, you say, "May I be well." And you say it again, even if you don't believe it yet. Eventually, belief follows practice. The heart begins to recognize its own softness. You begin to trust your ability to be with yourself, not as a judge, but as a friend. And that friendship becomes the ground of your spiritual life, not because it fixes everything, but because it changes the way you relate to everything. The critic will still speak, but you will listen differently. You will recognize its tone, you will know its history, and you will choose to respond with something older, deeper, more true. You will say, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but I no longer need to be perfect. I just need to be here. And here is enough." Here is where healing begins. Again and again, breath by breath, word by word, softly, steadily, with love. The moment you stop fighting yourself, something in your heart begins to relax. When you meet the inner critic with compassion instead of resistance, you start to uncover a quiet strength, not the strength of control, but of connection. But just as important as how you treat yourself is how you respond to the imperfection you see in others. Because no matter how gentle you become with your own inner world, life will continue to present you with people who forget, who fail, who act from fear. And here, your practice takes on a new shape. It's easy to speak of interdependence as a philosophical idea. It's harder to live it in the middle of daily life, especially when someone else's behavior feels careless or unkind. Yet Buddhism teaches that no one exists independently. No one is truly separate from the causes and conditions that shape them. And that includes the people who frustrate or disappoint you. That includes those who challenge your values or trigger your pain. Seeing this is not a way of excusing harm. It's a path to understanding and ultimately to liberation. When you look at someone else's imperfection, your mind often wants to categorize. to judge, to explain, to assign value. But behind that urge is a deeper process, a subtle attempt to reinforce a separate self. By making someone else wrong, you unconsciously affirm a position. You feel safer in your identity, more certain, more righteous. But this illusion of separation is what the Dharma invites you to see through. Accepting the flaws of others is not about condoning every action. It's about looking deeper, about recognizing that what you reject in someone else often reflects something unacknowledged in yourself. The mind wants to split reality into clean lines, good and bad, right and wrong, enlightened and deluded. But the practice asks a more uncomfortable question. What part of me is being revealed in this reaction? When someone speaks harshly, are you meeting their words or the story you've attached to them? When someone disappoints you, are you feeling their action or your expectation of who they were supposed to be? These moments are not just about relationship. They are reflections, mirrors, opportunities to see the ways you still cling to fixed identities, both yours and theirs. This is where interdependence moves from concept to insight. You begin to understand that your perception of others is shaped not just by their actions, but by your own lenses, your conditioning, your pain, your hopes, your fears. And when you see that clearly, you stop assuming you're seeing the whole picture. You start to listen more. You pause before reacting. You let space return to the interaction. That space is a form of freedom. It breaks the habit of reactivity. It gives you a choice, not necessarily to accept everything, but to see it differently. To respond not from the small self, the one that wants to be right, but from the larger awareness that holds both you and the other person in a shared field of causes and effects. Everyone is shaped by forces they didn't choose. The habits they repeat, the wounds they carry, the mistakes they make all arise from a long chain of conditions. When you recognize this, your heart starts to soften, not into passivity, but into clarity. You see that others are not fixed characters in your story. They are beings in process, just like you. And that process includes forgetting, just as yours does. It includes ignorance, fear, grasping, and confusion. The same energies you meet on your cushion arise in everyone else. The difference is only in the form they take. This doesn't mean every behavior is equally skillful, but it does mean that every person is equally shaped by impermanence, by suffering, by longing to be free. When you let this truth guide how you relate to others, judgment turns into curiosity. You begin to ask, what might they be carrying that I can't see? Or, what pain is speaking through this behavior? You don't have to know the answer. Just asking the question creates room for compassion. This kind of compassion is not sentimental. It doesn't require you to like everyone. It asks for something deeper, to not build your identity around rejection, to not use someone else's faults to feel more secure in your sense of self. Because the moment you do, the illusion of separation grows stronger, and the illusion of separation is the root of suffering. This is why accepting the imperfection of others is a spiritual practice. It's not about being agreeable, it's about loosening the grip of ego. It's about recognizing that the qualities you resist in others are not enemies, they're teachers. They reveal where you still hold on, where you still divide, where you still need others to be a certain way to feel okay. Letting go of that need is hard. It means allowing people to be incomplete. It means accepting that someone may never say what you want to hear, may never understand your perspective, may never change in the way you hoped, and still they are part of your world, part of your experience, part of your practice. In accepting this, you stop making peace conditional. You stop tying your well-being to other people's behavior. You start resting more in the awareness that holds it all, the joy and the disappointment, the connection and the distance. And from that awareness, a different kind of relationship becomes possible, one that isn't based on control or agreement, but on shared humanity. That humanity includes contradiction. You may love someone and feel hurt by them. You may see someone's goodness and still feel the need to set a boundary. You may wish someone well and still choose distance. These complexities are not problems to solve. They are realities to include. And when you include them, you stop waiting for others to be different before you can feel whole. This wholeness doesn't come from fixing people. It comes from seeing them clearly, flaws, limits, and still choosing to relate from the heart. It comes from remembering that even in imperfection, there is Buddha nature, not as a theory, but as a living truth. Even in the person who irritates you, even in the one who hurt you, even in the part of you that wants to reject them. This doesn't mean you accept harm. Compassion includes discernment, but it does mean you stop turning rejection into identity. You stop defining yourself by what you push away. You stop using someone else's imperfection to strengthen your sense of separateness. Interdependence teaches that there is no solid line between you and the other. What arises in them touches what arises in you. Their suffering is not foreign. It is made of the same elements. And when you stop resisting that truth, something deep relaxes. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to change them. You just have to stay present. Staying present in this way is an advanced practice. It's easy to meditate alone. It's harder to sit with someone who challenges you and still remember the path. But that is where the most profound insights often emerge, not in quiet, but in relationship, not in agreement, but in honesty. And honesty means seeing others as they are, not as you need them to be. It means dropping the fantasy that anyone will complete your sense of peace. It means realizing that the peace you seek comes not from having better people around you, but from letting go of the illusion of separateness between you and the ones who are already there. This letting go is not erasure, it's connection. It's seeing yourself not as a fixed self in a fixed world, but as a part of something fluid, changing, interdependent. A field of life, learning to meet itself through every moment of contact. Every person becomes a mirror, not because they reflect who you are on the surface, but because they show you where your attachments live, where your expectations still rule, where your love still has conditions. And in seeing this, you have the chance to open a little more, to meet the mirror with softness instead of reaction. And in that meeting, you begin to dissolve the illusion of the separate self. Not through theory, but through lived experience, through the way you forgive, through the way you pause, through the way you stay. This is not easy, but it is liberating, because the more you allow others to be imperfect, the more space you create for your own humanity. And in that shared space, awakening is no longer a private project. It becomes a shared unfolding. And in that unfolding, nothing is outside the path. Not even the people you once believed didn't belong there. So here you are, at the end of a journey that was never really about fixing anything, but about seeing clearly, maybe for the first time, that nothing needed to be fixed to begin with. You've walked through failure and distraction, through silence and noise, through the cracks in your identity and the cracks in your community. You've looked at the places you were taught to avoid and learned that even they are sacred. You've heard that the mess is the path, that the voice in your head isn't your enemy, that broken routines still hold wisdom, that even the teachings themselves don't have to be complete to be true, that your healing may take more than this lifetime, and that's okay, that even the parts of others that frustrate you are reflections, not barriers. And now, maybe, your shoulders feel a little lighter, your breath a little softer, your expectations a little quieter. If nothing else, let this truth settle in your heart tonight. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of peace. You can rest now, not because you finished something, but because you remembered that this moment is enough, that you are enough, just as you are. If this touched something in you, leave a comment below and share one imperfection you're learning to accept about yourself, about others, or about life. Not as a confession, but as a celebration. A way to say, I'm here, and I'm walking this path too. And if you want to keep growing, breathing, unlearning, and remembering with Ushit, that subscribe button and ring the bell. There's more where this came from. The path continues. And you never have to walk it alone. Until next time, sleep deeply, live gently, and keep returning.